The final season of Game of Thrones has arrived, but before we can get to the ending, first we have to understand the beginning. We've got the whole history of Westeros mapped out for you, just in time to get ready to see it all come crashing down. Here's the entire Game of Thrones timeline explained. In the distant past, Westeros was the home of the Children of the Forest, but roughly 12,000 years before the first episode of the series takes place, the first humans arrived from across the sea. The Children of the Forest called them the First Men, and 2,000 years of war ensued. Finally, a truce was called, but it was too late. The children turned to dark magic to protect themselves, and inadvertently created the undead Night King and his White Walkers. Once the pact was signed around 10,000 BC, the First Men entered the Age of Heroes, with legendary figures like Bran the Builder and Lan the Clever, creating much of what defines Westeros as we know it. But the Age of Heroes is defined most by the Long Night. Around the year 8000 BC, the White Walkers broke free from the control of the Children of the Forest, bringing about a winter of perpetual night that lasted an entire generation.
In that darkness, the White Walkers came for the first time. They swept through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses.
The children and First Men banded together to defeat the Night King, but at great cost. The children were nearly driven to extinction, and the wall was built to keep the walkers trapped in the frozen north, along with the tribes of humanity who would become the wildlings. Our clearest glimpse of this era comes from the Season 7 episode The Spoils of War, in which Jon Snow and Daenerys examine cave paintings beneath Dragonstone of the walkers, the children, and the First Men. Starting around 6,000 years in the story's past, a new group of human invaders arrived, the Andals. Originally from Essos, the Andals were compelled by visions of a seven-faced god to cross the sea and settle Westeros. Their religion, which became the Faith of the Seven, spurred social developments like knighthood and chivalry. The First Men, pushed out by the waves of Andals arriving over the course of several thousand years, slowly retreated to the north, where their traditions were kept by families like the Starks and the Mormonts. Still, to people from Essos, anyone from Westeros is considered to be an Andal, which is why even Northmen like Jorah are given that nickname by those who don't know any better.
Where are the dragons?
Were you betrayer again, Jorah the Andal?
Speaking of Essos, that continent developed very differently than Westeros, thanks to the magicians and dragon riders of legendary Valyria. They developed the dragon-fused stone roads which still crisscross Essos, and invented Valyrian steel, the strongest metal ever known. But roughly 400 years before the events shown in Game of Thrones, all of that ended with the doom of Valyria, a cataclysmic volcanic disaster that left the fabled empire in ruins.
Magnificent. Looks fresh forged.
It is.
No one's made a Valyrian steel sword since the doom of Valyria.
Among the only survivors were a minor family called the Targaryens, who had left Essos for the castle Dragonstone in Westeros 12 years earlier, after a prophetic dream warned them of the coming doom. The Targaryens were suddenly the survivors of a lost culture, and among the few people in the world with dragons at their beck and call. Though the forces of the Targaryens were puny compared to the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, they held the trump card, 3 great dragons, ridden by Aegon the Conqueror and his 2 sister wives. Aegon united the Seven Kingdoms under his rule, creating the Iron Throne out of the swords they surrendered to him. In the year 280, the seeds of the Targaryen downfall were sown. The Mad King, Aerys Targaryen, decided to marry off his son and heir, the beloved Prince Rhaegar, to the Dornish princess Elia Martell, the sister of Prince Doran and Oberyn Martell. But Rhaegar secretly was in love with Lyanna Stark, the betrothed of Robert Baratheon. In the year 281, Prince Rhaegar won a tournament at Harrenhal, but instead of naming his wife as the tournament's Queen of Love and Beauty, he chose Lyanna, driving a wedge between House Baratheon and the Targaryens. And they weren't alone. Breaking tradition, the Mad King named Tywin Lannister's son, Jaime Lannister, as one of his king's guard, forcing Jaime to renounce his claim as heir to House Lannister. Tywin was enraged and resigned as the Hand of the King, retreating to Casterly Rock. That set the stage for everything that has happened in the show since. In the year 282, Rhaegar had his marriage annulled and secretly wed Lyanna. The Starks, though, believing Lyanna was captured against her will, protested to the Mad King. In a fit of rage, the king murdered Lord Rickard and his eldest son, Brandon Stark. Brandon's brother Ned joined with Robert Baratheon in rebellion.
Your father and brother rode south once, on a king's demand.
During Robert's rebellion, Rhaegar was killed by Robert Baratheon, but not before Lyanna became pregnant. Ned Stark found her on her deathbed, having just given birth to a son she named Aegon Targaryen. Ned secretly vowed to raise him and protect him, and did so by adopting him as his own bastard son, whom he renamed Jon Snow. Meanwhile, the Mad King decided to destroy all of King's Landing rather than surrender, leading Jaime Lannister to kill him, earning the name Kingslayer. The Mad King's pregnant wife, though, escaped to safety. But tragically, Prince Rhaegar's wife Elia Martell and their 2 children weren't so lucky, murdered by the Mountain at the orders of Tywin Lannister.
I'm going to hear you confess before you die. You raped my sister. You murdered her. You killed her children.
With the Mad King slain and his army thoroughly beaten, Robert Baratheon took the throne. He married Cersei Lannister, though he never stopped mourning Lyanna.
She belonged with me.
Ned Stark returned home to Winterfell. He never told anyone the truth of Jon's parentage, letting even his own wife believe he had betrayed her with another woman, embittering her forever against Jon. As for the Mad King's wife, well, she died giving birth to a daughter named Daenerys, who along with her older brother Viserys was smuggled across the sea to Essos, in the hope that one day they could return to Westeros to claim their throne by winning the Game of Thrones.
In 2016, more than 23 million people watched each episode of Game of Thrones, eager to find out which intricate plots would unfold on screen. But did you know some of the most interesting storylines actually take place behind the scenes? Let's take a closer, spoiler-filled look at the untold truth of Game of Thrones. Pop quiz, hotshots. Author George R.R. Martin had long been reluctant to adapt his novel series, A Song of Ice and Fire, because he didn't want the on-screen version to tarnish the brilliance of his books. So when David Benioff and D.B. Weiss approached him for HBO, Martin agreed on one condition. They had to answer one question.
Is there a way to get out of the dungeon without using the wizard key?
What the hell are you talking about?
Actually, Martin asked them who they believed Jon Snow's true parents were. When Benioff and Weiss gave the correct answer, Martin gave his blessing in return. While the rest of the world finally learned the truth during the season 6 finale, that Jon Snow is really the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, it's not hard to admire Benioff and Weiss for sussing out the truth years ago. HBO nearly cancelled it before it aired. Believe it or not, even after solving Martin's riddle, Benioff and Weiss's first pass at the pilot episode wasn't very good. HBO executives and producers were so unhappy they almost ended the show before it could even begin. In an interview, D.B. Weiss explained that, after watching it, one of the HBO head honchos put it bluntly, "You guys have a massive problem. The script was rewritten, about 90% of the pilot was reshot with a new director, and the showrunners also made major changes to the cast. The role of Daenerys Targaryen was recast, substituting Emilia Clarke for actress Tamsin Merchant. Catelyn Stark was recast too, bringing in Michelle Fairley for Jennifer Ale. The original pilot has to date never aired, and that's a shame for plenty of reasons. George R.R. Martin explained that he had a cameo during Daenerys' wedding scene. It was, sad to say, left on the cutting room floor. I was a Pentoshi nobleman in the background, wearing a gigantic hat. Lady Stoneheart. If you're a Game of Thrones fan who's never read the books, you might not realize that one of the franchise's most popular characters hasn't even shown up on screen yet. In the novels, the Red Wedding isn't the end of the story for doomed Catelyn Stark. After she's killed, the Freys throw her body into the river, where it floats for 3 days before being recovered by Beric Dondarrion and the Brotherhood without banners. Lord Beric magically resurrects her, at the cost of his own life. He dies as the spark of life passes to Lady Catelyn. When she rises, her skin is grey, her hair has turned brittle and white, and her face has a mass of shredded wounds filled with clotted black blood. She cannot speak, because the bloody bastards cut her throat too deep for that, but she remembers. Catelyn Stark is dead, and Lady Stoneheart's reign has begun. She becomes the new leader of the Brotherhood, and directs them in a bloody campaign of vengeance against Lannisters and Freys. When learning Klingon just isn't enough. Although Martin only created a rudimentary outline for the fictional languages of his novel, Game of Thrones producers required a much broader vocabulary to use on the show. They turned to Language Creation Society founder David J. Peterson, and he created entire languages for both Dothraki and Valyrian, including grammatical rules and pronunciation guides. If you'd like to learn either language yourself, direct your web browser to the appropriately named dothraki.org. The Red Wedding really happened. Well, the Red Wedding sort of really happened. Author George R.R. Martin frequently draws from real history for his books, and a notably nasty incident in Scottish history served as inspiration for the infamous Red Wedding in Season 3. In a 15th century incident that would be later known as the Black Dinner, William, the 16-year-old Earl of Douglas, and his 10-year-old brother were invited to a feast with James II, the child King of Scotland. The king's advisors dragged the young Earl and his brothers outside the castle, gave them a mock trial, and then beheaded them both.
The Lannisters send their regards.
Similarly, the Purple Wedding, where King Joffrey meets his maker, was based on a real incident too: the poisoning and death of England's Prince Eustace at a feast in 1153. Sometimes fans do the work. While Martin created a lush and vibrantly detailed world in A Song of Ice and Fire, he does occasionally leave things out. As a result, the showrunners sometimes have to use their own imaginations, or that of others, to fill in the gaps. In one prominent example from Season 6, the show's costumers were tasked with creating a sigil buckle for Howland Reed to wear during the Tower of Joy flashback scenes. Martin had described it in the books as an alligator-like lizard lion, but he never offered a complete description. Luckily, fans have been creating artwork based on Martin's vision for years. The producers must have been impressed with this image, since it sure looks like it was copied and pasted right onto Reed's costume. Horsepower and bodybuilding. In Season 6, during the breathtaking cavalry charge of the Battle of the Bastards, Jon Snow stands alone on the battlefield as Ramsay Bolton and Umber horsemen ride toward him at breakneck speed, but Snow's army suddenly rushes up behind him, igniting one of the show's most impressive battle scenes. If you thought it had to be green screen trickery, however, you were wrong. The showrunners revealed in a behind-the-scenes video that those were dozens of real live horses charging Harrington at full gallop.
Until the last minute, I was stood there facing off against this cavalry charge, which is really scary. We're a bit annoyed because I think everyone's going to think it was CGI, and it wasn't.
So now we know about the horses, but how did producers create that impressive pile of bodies on the battlefield during the battle? The video reveals that all the bodies were actually life-size dummies, not computer-generated fakery. The crew acquired hundreds of mannequins, dressed them in appropriate House Umber and House Bolton armor, then coated them in mud and fake blood and piled them in a gigantic heap. Even the dead horses among the men are dummies equipped with saddles. Now that's attention to detail. Happy ending for Lady. One of the most heartbreaking moments on Game of Thrones came during Season 1, when Prince Joffrey orders the death of Arya Stark's beloved direwolf. When the Lannister soldiers can't locate Arya's pet, Queen Cersei orders that Sansa's direwolf, Lady, be killed instead. Thankfully, Lady, or rather, the Northern Inuit dog that played her on screen, got a happier ending in real life. Actress Sophie Turner bonded with the animal during the shoot, and she adopted her. More than meets the eye. In A Song of Ice and Fire, Daenerys Targaryen and her brother Viserys have purple eyes, and Game of Thrones showrunners planned for them to have them on the show as well. Unfortunately, the purple contacts affected actress Emilia Clarke so badly that producers decided to ditch the contacts and reshoot the scenes with her natural baby blues. And that's not the only eye-opening tale from the set. Arya Stark is blinded during her training with the Faceless Men, and in order to accurately portray the role, actress Maisie Williams wore completely opaque 16mm thick contact lenses for her speaking scenes, and a pair with only a pinhole in the center during fight scenes. A gift for hate. Until Ramsay Snow hit the screen during Season 3, Joffrey Baratheon was perhaps the most universally despised character on the show, which I disagree with. He was the best character by far. Irish actor Jack Gleeson did such a convincing job as a sadistic boy king that Martin reportedly sent him a note that read, "Congratulations on your marvelous performance. Everyone hates you." Gee, thanks, George.
Casting can make or break a show, and that's particularly true when it's based on a popular book series. When it comes to the beloved Game of Thrones on HBO, many of the characters don't quite match what's written in George R.R. Martin's books. In fact, in a few circumstances, they don't match at all. Here's how the cast of Game of Thrones should really look. Yara Greyjoy. The producers of Game of Thrones changed Asha Greyjoy's name to Yara on the show, maybe to avoid confusion with Osha the Wildling. But her name isn't all that's been changed. The novel says she's got black hair cut short, and that her nose was too big and too sharp for her thin face, but her smile made up for it. Yara doesn't do much smiling on the show, of course. But then with a brother like Theon, you wouldn't smile either. Speaking of, Theon Greyjoy. After he was tortured as the prisoner of Ramsay Bolton, Theon Greyjoy emerged from his ordeal mostly unscathed. Well, except for his dangly bits.
Next time you think about naked girls, when you feel an itch.
But in the books, Theon was apparently treated much more harshly, with him getting a gaunt, skeletal appearance as a result. The trauma of his captivity also turned his hair white, making him look practically like an old man. Of course, Theon was probably not so concerned about his hair by the time he escaped Ramsay. Ramsay Bolton. On the show, Ramsay is a really ugly person, but mostly because of his heinous acts, like the aforementioned torture and wiener cutting of Theon Greyjoy, or when he kills his own daddy. But in the books, Martin wrote him as a real uggo. He wrote, "He remained an ugly man, big-boned and slope-shouldered, with a fleshiness to him that suggested that in later life he would run to fat. His skin was pink and blotchy, his nose broad, his mouth small, his hair long and dark and dry. His lips were wide and meaty, but the thing men noticed first about him were his eyes. Small, close-set, queerly pale. His eyes were all but colorless, like 2 chips of dirty ice. Old dirty ice eyes. That's what we'll call him." And does anyone else think that shaggy haircut kind of makes him look like Glenn Danzig? Brienne of Tarth. Part of Brienne's tragedy is how much she wants to fall in love and be loved, but she knows she's painfully awkward and ugly by Westerosi standards. Of course, because this is television, the showrunners cast the beautiful and statuesque Gwendolyn Christie for the part, so she'll never actually be the homely butt kicker described in the books. Meanwhile, throughout the course of the novels, Brienne has run-ins with enemies that leave her even more damaged, like when she got her teeth knocked out. Martin wrote that Brienne's hair was a squirrel's nest of dirty straw and that her eyes were very large and very blue. Meanwhile, her features were broad and coarse, her teeth prominent and crooked, her mouth too wide, her lips so plump they seemed swollen. 1,000 freckles speckled her cheeks and brow, and her nose had been broken more than once. Sandor the Hound Clegane. HBO's makeup artists did a great job covering the massive scars and twisted flesh that cover one side of Sandor Clegane's face. It's pretty much perfect, except for one little thing. They got the wrong side of his face. The book says that the left side of his face was a ruin. His ear had been burned away, there was nothing but a hole. Down by his jaw, you could see a hint of bone where the flesh had been seared away. Aside from the ear and the bony jaw situation, the Hound looks pretty incredible. But it makes you wonder what made them flip sides like that. Maybe actor Rory McCann just doesn't like that side of his face?
Yarb.
Daario Naharis. It's not too hard to figure out why the show's producers mixed things up for their take on Daario Naharis. That's because Daario should have looked less like a badass warrior and more like a reject from The Hunger Games. The novels describe Daario as flamboyant with a beard that was cut into 3 prongs and dyed blue, the same color as his eyes and the curly hair that fell to his collar. His pointed mustachios were painted gold. No wonder Daenerys fell for the old gold mustachioed charmer. He probably picked up his style tips from the legendary Mystery, the pickup artist.
Meeting Mystery, it was almost like love at first sight. With his cowboy hat and his medallion necklace. I was like, this guy is smoking balls tonight.
Tyrion Lannister. Peter Dinklage is just about perfect as Tyrion Lannister, better known as the Imp. But there's just one problem, and at this point you can probably guess what it is. That's right, he's just not ugly enough. Noticing a trend here? The books describe him as having a squashed-in face. Then, after the events of the Battle of the Blackwater, he lost about half of his nose. And finally, he has different colored eyes. So, yeah. Jorah Mormont. Don't look so surprised, but Ser Jorah in the books is not quite as handsome as the showrunners would have us believe. Our favorite friend zone knight is more attractive and also more lightly built on the Game of Thrones television series than his book version counterpart. Once again, Martin plainly states that this character isn't going to win any beauty contests. Ser Jorah was not a handsome man. He had a neck and shoulders like a bull, and coarse black hair covered his arms and chest so thickly that there was none left for his head. Yeesh. Kinda looks like a medieval version of, like, Clint Howard. Or Bob Balaban. Or even Wallace Shawn. He'd make a good Jorah, right?
Inconceivable!
Yeah, you're probably right. Never mind.
Some of the most familiar faces in Westeros have changed a lot during the course of Game of Thrones' run on HBO. Over the course of the series, several of the show's key actors have ended up being replaced, leading fans to wonder just what really happened. Throughout the entire series, Emilia Clarke has shined as Daenerys Targaryen. From a mild young bride to the fierce and ruthless warrior she is today, Daenerys has been through one of the show's most exciting arcs, and without Clarke's portrayal, far fewer viewers would have fallen in love with the character the way that they have. Hailed as a feminist icon, fans have been gripped by Daenerys' finest moments, and Clarke herself has achieved international recognition for the role, as well as nominations for several awards.
I'm not going to stop the wheel. I'm going to break the wheel.
With that in mind, it might seem difficult to believe that anyone else ever could have played Daenerys, but in the initially troubled pilot for Game of Thrones, Daenerys was originally played by Tamsin Merchant. Best known for her role as Henry VIII's fifth wife, Catherine Howard, on The Tudors. Creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss have been open about their disdain for the original pilot, but neither the two showrunners nor casting director Nina Gold have fully discussed the reason for Merchant's exit. Today, fans are left to wonder just how different the series might have been with a different Daenerys riding those dragons. Game of Thrones' third season introduced a new potential love interest for Daenerys in the form of Daario Naharis, played by Ed Skrein. This clever, long-haired mercenary was obviously interested in Daenerys from day one, and when he betrayed his own men to join her side, it became clear that Daario's machinations would make him an even bigger player in the seasons to come. After a 3-episode arc in the third season, however, Skrein was unceremoniously replaced by Mikhail Hausman. As it turned out, Skrein had run into a scheduling issue, as he was set to appear in the new Transporter film. The actor has since admitted that it wasn't the easiest decision, but that he had no regrets in leaving Game of Thrones. Luckily for Hausman, he quickly became yet another one of the show's beloved key players, and his romance with Daenerys left many wondering where he might end up as the show concludes. In the early seasons of Game of Thrones, viewers discovered that Cersei Lannister's 3 children, all of whom were supposedly of Baratheon blood, were actually bastards born of her incestuous affair with her twin brother, Jaime. However, nobody paid much attention to any of the children besides Joffrey, Cersei's eldest and most wicked child, who eventually ascended to the throne and wreaked a significant amount of havoc on King's Landing and Westeros as a whole. As a result, the other 2 supposed Baratheon children were often shunted to the side, making it easy for them to be recast as required, a frequent reality when dealing with young actors whose growth easily put them out of sync with the show's pacing. Because of these age issues, Tommen Baratheon was recast in the show's 4th season, and when it was time for him to take the crown from Joffrey, Callum Wary was replaced by Dean Charles Chapman. Chapman went on to handle many of the Mild King Tommen's more difficult scenes, including a love scene with his new wife, Margaery Tyrell, as well as his death at the end of the 6th season. However, many fans might have recognized Chapman's face from somewhere, since he had actually appeared in the show's 3rd season, playing a young Lannister squire who was held hostage by the Starks and eventually killed by Rickard Karstark. This actually gives Chapman a rare distinction of having played 2 separate roles during the show's run, and having died twice, too. Much like Tom and Cersei Lannister's middle child, Myrcella went largely overlooked until later seasons of Thrones. Myrcella was essentially left out of the plot entirely until the 2nd season, when her uncle Tyrion decided to send her to Dorne, creating a permanent rift between Tyrion and Cersei. In the 5th season, she reappeared as a love-struck teenager engaged to Trystane Martell, the young prince of Dorne. Thanks to an ongoing battle between the Lannister and Martell families, she ended up murdered at the hands of Ellaria Sand shortly after she discovered her true parentage. Though Myrcella was played by the young actress Amy Richardson during her appearances in the early seasons, when she returned, she was played by the dynamic Nell Tiger Free. Much like Tommen's strategic recasting, this can likely be chalked up to discrepancies between the growth of the actor and her character. As the older of the much-feared Clegane brothers, the Mountain is one of Westeros' most terrifying warriors. And although he has kinda managed to make it through the entire series so far, he has nonetheless undergone a significant transformation along the way. Once a formidable fighter known for his penchant for committing war crimes on behalf of the Lannisters, the Mountain was nearly felled by a poisoned spear tip during his duel with Oberyn Martell in Season 4. After that, however, he was turned into a kind of mute zombie, loyal only to Cersei herself. But that wasn't the only transformation that the Mountain has undergone during Game of Thrones' run, as he's actually been played by no fewer than 3 separate actors. In Season 1, when the Mountain nearly killed Loras Tyrell after a joust, he was played by Conan Stevens, an Australian actor. The Mountain was far less visible in Season 2, but when he did appear, he was played by the Welsh actor Ian White. From the 4th season on, the fearsome and intimidating Icelandic strongman Hafthor Ulis Bjornsson has portrayed the Mountain. Of course, now that he's ensconced in an iron mask, it doesn't seem to matter much that this massive man has changed faces 3 times. The Tarly family isn't exactly the most important clan in Westeros, but astute viewers will have gotten to know them pretty well over the years. By far the most significant member of the family is Samwell Tarly, the lovable bookworm of the Night's Watch and frequent companion to Jon Snow. Sam has proven to be the heart and soul of the show time and time again, but he's not so popular among his own family. In the 6th season, when Sam arrived at Horn Hill with his girlfriend, Gilly, he received a cold welcome from his stern father, Randall, who clearly favors Sam's handsome and accomplished brother, Dickon.
Not fat enough already.
During Season 6, Freddie Stroma of Harry Potter fame appeared as Dickon. However, scheduling issues forced him out of the show, so Black Sails' Tom Hopper stepped in. To plenty of acclaim from fans. Sadly, Hopper's time as Dickon has also been cut short, as both he and his father Randall were burned alive by Daenerys when they refused to bend the knee to her in Season 7. Easy come, easy go. Most viewers of the show will be familiar with Stannis Baratheon, who, as King Robert Baratheon's brother, staunchly believed he was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, but some might not remember his wife, Selise Baratheon. While Stannis fought for the throne with the aid of Melisandre, Selise remained nothing if not loyal. After all, she stuck by her husband through several unsuccessful battles, as well as his obvious attraction to Melisandre herself. When Stannis used their daughter, Shireen, as a human sacrifice, Selise finally took her own life, only for Stannis to meet his final defeat in battle a few hours later. Selise, when she was introduced, was a very minor character who can be spotted simply standing in the vicinity of Melisandre and Stannis, while the latter commits himself to the Lord of Light during a magical ceremony in the 2nd season's premiere. At that time, she was played by Sarah McKeever, had no lines at all, and served as little more than a glorified extra. However, when Selise's role was expanded to include a multi-episode arc, the show chose a more venerated actress for the role, Tara Fitzgerald, who famously appeared opposite Ralph Fiennes in Hamlet on Broadway during the mid-1990s. Game of Thrones' first episode ended on a pretty shocking final scene. Specifically, the young Bran Stark being pushed out of a tall tower after catching Jaime and Cersei in a compromising position. Bran survived the fall, however, losing his mobility and eventually gaining a new set of powers, including the ability to review and even meddle in events of the very distant past, making him the heir apparent to the role of the Three-Eyed Raven. When the audience finally met the mysterious Three-Eyed Raven in Season 4, he looked fairly different to the character fans would later come to know. Originally played by Struan Roger, Bran first meets the Raven while the omniscient being is holed up in a secluded tree. By the time the Three-Eyed Raven returned to the show in its 6th season, Roger had been replaced by legendary actor Max von Sydow, best known for The Exorcist and Flash Gordon. Since then, it has been von Sydow's Raven who has guided Bran through the secrets of the past, present, and future of Westeros. Game of Thrones is rife with villains and antagonists, but few are more sinister or more mysterious than the Night King, the ancient and seemingly infallible leader of the White Walkers. The Walkers, who reside far north of a wall that separates Westeros from the northern wilderness, were previously considered nothing more than a frightening legend, but have recently made their presence known in Westeros in a pretty spectacular way. Throughout the show's run, audiences have watched the Night King perform a range of despicable acts, from turning a child's sacrifice into a White Walker to taking down one of Daenerys' beloved dragons. Though the character comes to life via impressive prosthetic makeup, as the show went on, sharp-eyed viewers realized that the Night King looked a little different from when we first met him. Before Season 6, the Night King was played by Richard Blake, but the role then went to Vladimir Furdik, an actor hailing from Slovakia. Though the show's creators have never provided a concrete reason for the change, it's possible that Furdik won the role thanks to his history as a stuntman, giving him more mobility for battle scenes. Throughout Thrones' run, Beric Dondarrion has quite literally lived several lives. In Season 1, he served as nothing more than a member of a search party sent by Ned Stark to bring the Mountain to justice. As war broke out in Westeros, however, he joined a group called the Brotherhood Without Banners, who, through their loyalty to the Lord of Light, have followed Beric as he is constantly revived from the dead by his resident Red Priest, Thoros of Myr. Most recently, Beric has been found aiding Jon Snow in his fight against the White Walkers, traveling north of the Wall in order to get more information on these mysterious and ancient creatures. David Michael Scott portrayed Beric for his minor role during the first season. Beginning in Season 3, however, Irish actor Richard Dormer took the reins. Luckily, Beric's change in appearance is easy enough to explain in-universe, considering the man died multiple times off-screen before viewers met him for the second time again.
After an uneven final season comprised of only 6 episodes, fans were excited, concerned, and downright desperate to see how the Game of Thrones saga would finally end. From the Iron Throne to the fate of Westeros and the final showdown between Daenerys and Jon Snow, here's what the ending of Game of Thrones means not just for the final season, but for the entire series. Beware, spoilers are coming. After the burning of King's Landing in the previous episode, several main characters wander through the brutal aftermath, with Tyrion Lannister, the Hand of the Queen, looking stricken as he walks down ruined streets and sees the bodies of those Daenerys burned without mercy. As he and Jon Snow survey the destruction, Jon and Tyrion separately set off to meet the Queen. Jon's journey finds him at odds with Grey Worm over the execution of Lannister soldiers, but soon after Tyrion sets off on his own, he makes a horrifying discovery. In a truly heartbreaking moment, Tyrion finds the bodies of his brother and sister and breaks down amid the rubble. With the rest of his house literally entombed, Tyrion finds himself suddenly alone, and in that moment, his resolve to defy his queen strengthens. Later, as the Dothraki and Unsullied celebrate their victory, Daenerys makes a grand entrance, riding atop Drogon and landing in a perfect shot with her silhouetted by his wings. While she gives a full-throated victory speech in which she praises her army for taking down a tyrant and claiming the city as their own, viewers know the truth. Dany is no better than the tyrant she aims to replace. In fact, she's probably a lot worse, as she announces her plans to prolong the war and conquer the rest of the world. Daenerys has always bent toward justice, but with this proclamation, it seems as if she's finally gone too far, and even her most trusted advisors seemed frightened by her endless hunger for power. In the aftermath of the siege on King's Landing, during which Tyrion begged his queen to show mercy to those who couldn't defend themselves, it seems as if the last remaining Lannister could no longer bring himself to follow Daenerys, and has seen her for what she really is, or at least what she's ultimately become. Daenerys is already furious with Tyrion after finding out that he freed Jaime, which ultimately doesn't even matter, considering that Jaime and Cersei are both dead. But Tyrion has his own grievances with the Mother of Dragons. As they confront each other atop a ruined King's Landing, he admits that he freed his brother, but reminds her that she decimated an entire city. Moments later, he tosses aside the badge that identifies him as the Hand of the Queen. Daenerys immediately has him arrested, but his point is made, marking yet another advisor who leaves her side when she needs them the most. Her transformation into a new version of her father, the Mad King, who killed anyone who displeased him, is complete. As Tyrion sits in captivity awaiting his certain execution, he's visited by a visibly torn Jon Snow, who, despite his allegiance to Daenerys, still obviously trusts Tyrion's counsel. Jon defends Daenerys at first, saying that though he can't condone what happened, the war is finally over. But Tyrion persists, reminding Jon that Daenerys isn't even close to finished, and the only way she can achieve her ultimate goal is through even more death and destruction on a global scale. Tyrion also reminds Jon that he once had the power to do what Daenerys did, specifically to ride atop a dragon and destroy an entire city, and he never would. Before she sacked King's Landing, Daenerys' destruction often seemed entirely righteous, like when she freed slaves and killed their masters. But as Tyrion points out, the murder of countless innocent men, women, and children can't possibly be defended, and at this point, the Dragon Queen will stop at nothing to achieve her goals. Though Tyrion recognizes that love is more powerful than reason, he still does everything in his power to convince Jon of the path ahead.
You've tried to protect people. Who is the greatest threat to the people now?
Jon, the true heir to the throne, having received wise counsel from the Hand, knows that there's only one move left to finally end the war once and for all. Jon finds Daenerys in the throne room, admiring the throne she's worked so hard to win. As he asks her why she murdered children in the streets of the capital, she tries to entice him with her vision of the new world the two of them can build together. As they embrace, Jon proclaims that Daenerys will always be his queen. Just when it seems like all hope for peace is lost, he stabs her, holding her and weeping. This is the moment the series has been building towards since the beginning. Ned Stark lost his head for being too honorable. In the end, Jon Snow betrayed his honor in order to save it. He made the impossible choice, killing his lover and queen, to whom he'd pledged his eternal loyalty for the greater good of his family and the world. After Jon becomes the Queenslayer, all is silent for a moment, until Drogon reappears, coming face to face with Jon in a frightening moment when it seems like the last remaining Targaryen might immediately face justice for killing the Mother of Dragons. However, Drogon's anguish over the death of his mother is directed not at Jon, but at something entirely different, specifically the Iron Throne, which he torches into a melted pile of slag in a stream of fire. The ultimate symbol of power in Westeros is completely destroyed. Daenerys has always referred to her dragons as her children, and her final moments with Drogon are heartfelt as he tries to nudge her awake and screams in pain for his lost mother. After demolishing the throne once and for all, Drogon gently lifts Daenerys off the ground and flies away with her safely ensconced in his claws, making for a fitting end to Daenerys' arc. She was reborn with all 3 of her dragons, and even in death, she remains a part of her only remaining child. Moreover, Drogon identifies Dany's true killer without uttering a word. It wasn't Jon who was responsible for the end of her life. Instead, it was her unending quest to seek the Iron Throne itself. It's like Cersei said way back in Season 1.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground.
Since the beginning, the throne has represented death. It was composed of the weapons of the king's enemies, and men and women fought and killed for a chance to sit on it. Daenerys always wanted to break the wheel. Now that Drogon has destroyed the Iron Throne, the wheel in Westeros has finally been broken. Weeks after Daenerys' death, Tyrion is led out of his cell to face a new council made up of familiar characters alongside a few faces who have been absent from the show for several seasons. The Unsullied have taken King's Landing and are holding Jon and Tyrion captive, and Tyrion must not only argue his case against Grey Worm, but for the entire council. But before Tyrion's fate can be decided, the lords and ladies of Westeros must choose a new monarch. As a group debates who should rule next, Tyrion is asked whether or not he wants the job. He describes himself as the worst possible choice, and no one really argues his points. In order to explain who he does have in mind, however, Tyrion begins by telling the assembled that what unites everybody is the power of a story, then identifying the person he says has the best story, Bran Stark, who has journeyed beyond the wall and back to become the all-seeing three-eyed raven. Everybody seems a bit stunned by this unexpected nomination, except for Bran, but now that he's the three-eyed raven, looking surprised isn't really his thing. But once Tyrion points out that because Bran can't have children, the leader of Westeros will be chosen rather than receive it by birthright, he receives a unanimous vote. After everything the Starks have lived through, the eldest surviving Stark son is named Bran the Broken, first of his name. In exchange, Bran chooses Tyrion as his new hand, bringing his arc to a fitting conclusion. As far as his own arc is concerned, Bran's ascension to the throne may seem surprising given the path his story has taken throughout the series. Moreover, in this final season, Bran doesn't actually do much, aside from glower at other characters from his chair and say weird things. But if you remember the very first episode of the series, Bran has a front row seat to an execution carried out by his father. The scene is meant as a lesson for Bran in the rules of justice and leadership, namely that duty and honor justifies violence and death. But now that Bran will take over as King of Westeros in the wake of Daenerys' war crimes, it seems like a sure bet that he'll have taken his father's lesson and will apply the inverse. Mercy, fairness, and justice trump duty and honor, and are the only true path to peace and life. Since the beginning of the season, Sansa, who has established herself as a fair leader as well as a sharp and shrewd strategist, has bristled at the thought of the North falling under anyone's rule. Throughout Daenerys' reign, she argued for the North to maintain its status as an independent territory with its own monarchs and wardens. When Jon told her about his true parentage, she immediately shared the information with Tyrion, clearly hoping to keep control of the North by not only keeping a tyrant from taking the throne, but by putting a half-Stark regent in power. While that plan didn't pan out, Sansa ultimately made sure the North was taken care of. During the council meeting, Sansa is hesitant to cast a vote in favor of Bran, and as she turns to her brother and tells him that she loves him and that she's sure he'll be a great king, she insists that the North remain its own territory, and Bran grants her request. Thanks to Sansa, the North can keep its identity and its independence, and since the North always remembers, its citizens will certainly remember what the Lady of Winterfell did to protect them. As for the rest of the characters, each of them is seen off properly, with arcs completed, stories told, and journeys finally finished. Grey Worm sets off for Noth alone, still smarting after losing both Missandei and his queen. Bronn returns to claim his lordship of High Garden and becomes Master of Coin in Bran's administration, flanked by a small council that includes Brienne, Davos, Sam, and Tyrion. Podrick Payne, now Bran's attendant, has been knighted and made a member of the King's Guard since viewers last saw him. Not only are several stories completed, but some characters write out stories of their own, making sure the people they lost won't be forgotten. After finding Jaime's unfinished entry in the book listing Westerosi knights, Brienne completes it herself, capping it off by writing, "Died protecting his queen." Meanwhile, Sam presents the council with a book written by one of the maesters called, what else? A Song of Ice and Fire, in an obvious and rather heavy-handed reference to the book series by George R.R. Martin on which the series is based. Unlike Martin's series, however, this book appears to be finished. Jon, for murdering the queen, is banished back into the Night's Watch, a symbolic move, and the only way the council can seem to broker peace with the Unsullied and get them to relinquish their hold on the city. Upon returning to Castle Black, Jon reunites with Tormund, as well as a large group of wildlings and his direwolf Ghost, who, despite missing an ear, is thrilled to see his master once again. In the end, the series closes with shots of the family with which it began, the Starks, who have scattered to various corners of Westeros and beyond. Sansa is coronated at Winterfell, proudly taking her seat as the citizens of the North raise their swords and cheer for the new queen in the North. Arya boards a ship headed for the unknown lands west of Westeros, sailing under the Stark banner on a quest to learn what lies beyond the part of the world where their maps end. Meanwhile, Jon sets out from Castle Black with Tormund, Ghost, and a group of wildlings in tow. As they begin their journey to the far north, some green growth can be seen peeking out from underneath the thick layers of snow. Throughout Game of Thrones' run, audiences have always been told that winter is coming, but now that the Night King is no more and a new age has begun in Westeros, it seems as if the show's long winter may finally be coming to an end.
Game of Thrones has always been a pretty sprawling TV show, and plenty of material has ended up on the cutting room floor. But though these scenes were deleted, they're still fascinating to explore, especially since these moments could have subtly changed the course of the story, or at least our perception of events. Let's explore some of the more substantial moments that never made the final cut. The execution of Littlefinger was one of the most shocking moments in the Season 7 finale, but how did Sansa and Arya Stark come to learn about his whole lifetime of crimes? In an interview with Variety, actor Isaac Hempstead Wright, who portrays Bran Stark, revealed that he shot a deleted sequence with Sophie Turner, who portrays Sansa. In the scene, Sansa reportedly consulted with Bran just ahead of Littlefinger's trial. As you may recall, Sansa was convinced her sister Arya was out to assassinate her in order to become the Lady of Winterfell. Arya suspected the same of Sansa, and it was all thanks to that master manipulator, Littlefinger. Viewers were sweating buckets watching the Season 7 finale, since it looked like one of the Stark sisters might kill the other. But then Sansa and Arya flipped the script, sentencing Littlefinger to death, revealing their feud to be an elaborate ruse.
Thank you for all your many lessons, Lord Baelish. I will never forget them.
It was a big twist, but it seemed to leave a bit of a plot hole behind too. How were the Stark children suddenly so certain of Littlefinger's history of manipulation and betrayal? According to Hempstead Wright, a deleted scene from the episode would have cleared up any ambiguity. It revealed exactly how the Stark sisters learned of Littlefinger's schemes, and it would have let audiences see how Sansa and Arya arrived at the decision to execute him. In the deleted scene, Bran uses his newfound abilities as a three-eyed raven to peer into Littlefinger's past, unearthing every underhanded thing he'd ever done in his quest for power. Hempstead Wright told Variety, the story was that it suddenly occurred to Sansa that she had a huge CCTV department at her discretion, and it might be a good idea to check with Bran first before she guts her own sister. Though audiences can kind of still fill in the blanks without the scene, its inclusion would have threaded the plot together with a little more clarity. It also would have shed more light on Bran's immense powers, giving us a much stronger impression of how extraordinary his gifts really are. Bran's ability to access the history of man and the secrets of Westeros is an astonishing skill, and a potentially powerful weapon. As was made clear in Season 8, Bran's knowledge that Jon is the rightful heir to the Seven Kingdoms sparked an unfortunate chain of events, one that's played an important part in Daenerys Targaryen's descent into madness. Sansa has undergone a remarkable transformation since we first met the dreamy young girl looking forward to marriage, and one person who's had a major hand in her development is Sandor Clegane, otherwise known as the Hound. Throughout much of Game of Thrones, he seemed ultimately drawn to and repulsed by Sansa's innocence, frequently calling her Little Bird with a mixture of sweetness and condescension.
No, Little Bird, I won't hurt you.
Of course, the Hound uses that nickname again in the 4th episode of Season 8, when the dynamics between the two are remarkably different. It's a scene that highlights just how much Sansa has grown throughout the course of Game of Thrones.
You've changed, Little Bird.
Yet one deleted scene all the way back in Season 2 depicts a Sansa who's already prepared to stand up to the Hound.
Sing.
I don't know any songs. Not anymore.
Instead of a quivering waif, we see a young woman who's perfectly willing to stand her ground. And perhaps that was the problem. The scene of her standing up for herself, even a little bit, could have been seen as too much too soon, as far as Sansa's development is concerned. Sansa and the Hound's Season 8 reunion certainly wouldn't have been half as bittersweet if she'd already demonstrated the potential for such strength way back in Season 2. Tormund has always been right at the center of the tension between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings. He's helpful to the Night's Watch, but he's not sentimental about their history. He's committed to being part of the Free Folk, but he's also Jon Snow's friend. When Jon was the commander of the Night's Watch, he welcomed Tormund and other Wildlings across the wall. That brought the tension to its boiling point, resulting in the slaying of Jon Snow. In a deleted scene from Season 5 that would have taken place before Jon's death and resurrection, Sir Alistair Thorne, one of Snow's eventual killers, verbally spars with Tormund. He lets Tormund know just how much he distrusts him and how little he likes housing him. Tormund gruffly replies,
"You must no longer be in charge then."
It's a moment of intense foreshadowing, but had the scene been included in the show, it might have made Tormund seem partially responsible for Jon Snow's murder, however involuntarily. Though he didn't wield a dagger, his aggressive needling of Alistair might have been perceived as the straw that broke the camel's back. Audiences might have blamed Tormund for Sir Alistair's subsequent actions. Though the scene is appropriate for that era of the show, it may well have cast a pall over an alliance that has since helped shape the future of Westeros. Game of Thrones mines conflict from absolutely every angle. Life against death, woman against man, religion against cynicism. Another major clash? The ongoing animosity between the nobility and common folk of Westeros. The prostitute Shae had a pretty long run on Game of Thrones, but her luck eventually ran out. First, there was her damaging testimony against Tyrion Lannister, who then tragically killed her when he encountered her in his father's bed. It was tragic and it was extreme, but a deleted scene between Shae and Bronn reveals a far more tender side to the conflict, and it might change how you view Shae's actions. In the scene, Bronn commiserates with Shae as a fellow commoner.
These people, even the good ones, they use us as they please. And when we're no longer any use, they spit us out.
It's the kindest we've ever seen Bronn, and the moment emphasizes the difficult position that Shae was in.
We have to adapt to circumstances, is what I'm saying. Learn some new tricks.
With this scene in mind, what happens between Shae and Tyrion becomes even more complicated. Yes, she did something awful, but this scene dares to ask, what choice did she have? Grand Maester Pycelle was always a conniving man. Even when acting like a doddering old fool, he delighted in playing passive-aggressive games. And he never missed an opportunity to dismiss and disrespect Tyrion. But his detestable nature often went completely unnoticed by other characters on Game of Thrones. It even went unnoticed by many people watching the show. But a deleted scene between Pycelle and Tywin Lannister would have changed that dynamic enormously. Pycelle interrupts Tywin while he's fishing, and as usual, he's playing the fool in order to seem non-threatening and inept. Unimpressed by the charade, Tywin cuts off Pycelle's babbling.
Stop it. Am I the only one to see through this performance?
This certainly changes the dynamic between Pycelle and Tywin. It also suggests that most of the other people in King's Landing are comparably daft. The scene doesn't just make Tywin seem more formidable, it also changes how we see Pycelle. Now he seems like a dangerous and devious man, instead of a mild annoyance. In the second season of Game of Thrones, Daenerys learns an important lesson in trust after she's ferociously betrayed by her handmaiden, Doreah.
Khaleesi, please. You said you'd never leave Karth alive. Come.
Doreah meets a wholly unfortunate end, with Daenerys sealing her inside a vault to die, which is an arguably kind of a harsh way to take somebody out. As it turns out, we didn't even see the worst of Doreah's actions. In a deleted scene from Season 2, she gleefully strangles Daenerys' handmaiden Irri to death. Of course, that scene effectively turns Doreah into a far more insidious character, and it makes her betrayal seem so much worse than what we ever saw on screen. The White Walkers were always a major threat in Game of Thrones, but it was also a major challenge to get the people of Westeros to believe the threat was real. Jon Snow spent an enormous chunk of screen time arguing about the Walkers, though few people were ever willing to take his warnings or Bran's visions to heart.
A crippled boy claims to have seen dead men on the march beyond the wall, thanks to the magical help of a raven with 3 eyes.
Yes, it is a bit much.
But in a deleted Season 2 scene that we never got to see, it's revealed that Tywin Lannister took the White Walkers quite seriously from early on. After hearing stories of corpses with blue eyes and their bone-white masters, Tywin discusses sending an envoy to Mance Rayder, and then the King Beyond the Wall. This plot development would have seriously changed our perception of Tywin, and it would have considerably raised the stakes for the Lannisters as a whole. Had the scene aired, we would have seen the first major house start preparing for battle with the White Walkers far ahead of time, while pretty much everyone else was too busy being skeptical. spectacle. Renly's death was a linchpin of several plot threads: Melisandre's dark and complex magic, the Tyrell's insatiable thirst for power, and the War of the Five Kings. Renly had the charm and charisma that Stannis lacked. He had the backing of a large and fruitful house, and brilliant women like Marjorie at his side. At this point, it's all too easy to forget what a genuine threat he was. But above and beyond that, Renly was Loras's lover, and the deleted scene from Season 2 illustrates their love with a tenderness that's rather unusual for the world of Game of Thrones. In the scene, Loras laments his inability to stop Renly's murder, confiding in his sister Marjorie that he feels somewhat responsible for his lover's death. Marjorie urges Loras to turn his attention to their family.
We have to think of our house now. The whole country's at war.
This scene makes the Tyrell's emotional stakes all the more clear. It's easy to see Marjorie as conniving above all else, but this unusually touching moment illustrates that she still very much loves her brother. Olenna Tyrell was one of the most fearsome characters in Game of Thrones. A brilliant strategist, a cynical plotter, and a devoted grandmother, she was a woman who'd do anything to protect her family and their interests. Case in point, her murder of Joffrey Baratheon at his wedding. In a deleted scene from Season 6, she discusses the Lannisters with her son, Mace Tyrell. After Mace has made Cersei's Master of Coin, he's evidently unable to see how he's being manipulated. But Olenna sees exactly what's going on, and she's determined to keep Loras and Marjorie as safe as possible.
Cersei Lannister sent you to Bravos to get you out of her way. And she sent the bloody King's Guard to make certain you stayed there.
The scene brings to light exactly how close Cersei's plan came to ending in failure, and how enormously the Tyrells would go on to lose in Season 7, and thus how powerful Cersei truly is by the last season of the series. Though forces were arrayed on both the Tyrell and Lannister sides, it all came down to a game of wits between the Queen of Westeros and the Queen of Thorns. The dire wolves have always been more than pets. Their fates have foreshadowed and influenced the fates of the Stark children from the very beginning, from Lady's death and Sansa's subsequent suffering, to Grey Wind's mutilation and Robb's murder at the Red Wedding. In a deleted scene from Season 7, Jon gives Ghost an important task before he sets off to meet Daenerys: keep Sansa safe. Ghost is essentially the only Stark direwolf left. Yes, there's still Nymeria, but that's a story for another day. The fact that Jon entrusted this job to Ghost is a sign of just how deeply he cares for Sansa. It also emphasizes how important Sansa, Arya, Jon, and Bran are to each other. Their strong alliance has survived that of the Lannisters, the Tyrells, and the Targaryens. Ghost is a part of Jon, or at least he used to be, before the King in the North up and ditched him in Season 8. You really do know nothing, Jon Snow.
Since it premiered on HBO in the spring of 2011, Game of Thrones has become a worldwide smash. Many stars of the show have skyrocketed to fame, but over the course of making the series, they've also encountered some unexpected hardships. Here's a look at some scary, tricky, and grueling sacrifices actors had to make for Game of Thrones. In her years of playing Sansa Stark, Sophie Turner has endured arranged marriages, sexual violence, and the loss of loved ones. Though Sansa began the show as a spoiled child who wanted nothing more than to be a princess, she has grown into a shrewd warrior. Turner hasn't personally been through the horrors that Sansa has, but she's endured her fair share of difficulties, including an unhygienic request. After Sansa escaped from King's Landing, Turner was asked to stop washing her hair so she would look as disheveled as possible during Sansa's darkest times. It wasn't an enjoyable experience for Turner. She said, "It was really disgusting. Now I wear a wig so I can wash my hair whenever I want, which is nice. But yes, for a couple of years I was living with pretty greasy hair." One of the show's all-time hardest scenes to watch has to be the Red Wedding near the end of the third season. Robb Stark betrays his promise to marry the daughter of one of his allies, Walder Frey. So the Freys slaughter Robb, his pregnant bride Talisa, and his mother Catelyn. None of the actors involved in the Red Wedding were particularly excited about filming the sequence, but Una Chaplin, who played Talisa, had it really bad. After her pregnant character is repeatedly stabbed in the stomach, she's left on the floor to torment Robb. Chaplin spent hours lying on a floor in a cold Belfast studio. She was freezing and covered in fake blood while she waited for the rest of the cast to finish their scenes. Chaplin's commitment can't be understated. In the 7th season of Game of Thrones, several characters who hadn't yet met came together, with varying results. When Daenerys Targaryen met Jaime Lannister for the first time, it didn't go very well.
During their battle, Bronn, Jaime's right-hand man, must operate an enormous spear launcher to fight against Daenerys' dragon, Drogon. Though Bronn does get one good hit in against Drogon, the machine is quickly burned to ashes.
Bronn survives, but gets caught in the flames. Drogon spends most of the scene setting fire to the battlefield. All the actors had to contend with smoke inhalation, but Jerome Flynn, who plays Bronn, got the worst of it. Director of photography Robert McLaughlin burned diesel oil for dramatic black smoke. Most of the crew wore masks. Flynn had to go unmasked, and it's hard to miss the discomfort visible on his face. The Battle of the Bastards, which took place during the show's 6th season, was the culmination of a long chain of events. That included Jon Snow's reunion with his sister Sansa, her escape from her sociopathic husband Ramsay Bolton, and the long-awaited showdown among them all. As with many battles on Game of Thrones, each moment is more brutal than the last, and throughout the fight, it seems unlikely that Jon Snow will emerge victorious. At one point, he ends up submerged in a pile of dead bodies and living soldiers, gasping for breath as he struggles to rise to the surface, which reportedly terrified actor Kit Harington, who plays Snow. He didn't enjoy this part of filming, as being crushed is one of his biggest fears. He gave up his own comfort to create a singular moment for viewers. Speaking of Ramsay Bolton, when viewers met the character, played by Iwan Rheon in Season 3, he was a bastard, much like Jon Snow. When he helped his father, Roose Bolton, secure the North, he was made an official Bolton in his own right. After watching Ramsay generally be the worst person of all time, fans were thrilled when Ramsay met a bitter and bloody end in the aftermath of the Battle of the Bastards. It was especially satisfying to hear him being torn apart by his own pack of angry attack dogs.
They're loyal beasts.
They were. Now they're starving.
But before that goes down, once the larger battle ends, Jon and Ramsay find themselves back at Winterfell ready to keep fighting. Jon snaps and brutally beats Ramsay into submission. However, some of this ended up becoming a reality for Rheon, who was actually punched in the face twice by Harington. Harington said Rheon was extremely nice about the situation, but it's unlikely that Rheon was thrilled about taking two for the team. Since debuting on the show during Season 2, Brienne of Tarth, played by actress Gwendolyn Christie, has won audiences' hearts with her fierce battle skills, unerring loyalty, and quick quips. After serving a few fallen characters, including Catelyn Stark, Brienne strikes up a real friendship with Jaime Lannister. Between her bond with the Kingslayer and her continued devotion to Catelyn, Brienne has become a fan favorite. As such, fans are always frightened when Brienne ends up in a life-threatening situation. When Brienne and Jaime are captured and held hostage by Locke, a hunter for House Bolton, Locke forces Brienne to face down a real bear in a fighting pit, causing Jaime to come in and rescue her. Although Christie said the bear was a diva, requiring its own trailer, she also said it was terrifying to face down the giant animal with nothing more than an electric fence between them.
And you
Why
believe
do you
them?
think I look so scared?
Few of Thrones villains have elicited a public reaction quite as visceral as Joffrey Baratheon, the sadistic eldest son of Cersei Lannister. A bitter, violence-hungry child born of incest, King Joffrey's vengeful and ill-advised decision to execute Ned Stark in the show's first season set off most of the entire story's conflict.
So long as I am your king, treason shall never go unpunished. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head.
Viewers have watched him murder sex workers, threaten to beat women, and verbally abuse pretty much everyone.
It's no wonder viewers loved watching Joffrey get slapped. He meets an extremely ugly end early in the 4th season. During his wedding to Marjorie Tyrell, Joffrey takes a final sip of wine, gruesomely choking to death in front of the entire court. Actor Jack Gleeson quit acting after his last moments as Joffrey. He said that aside from the choking itself, keeping his eyes open was the hardest part. They actually had to be held open so he didn't blink, making filming the scene that much more uncomfortable. Cersei Lannister, yet another Thrones character that viewers love to hate, has committed her fair share of atrocities. You know, stuff like enabling her evil son Joffrey, carrying on a decades-long affair with her twin brother, and slaughtering most of King's Landing by burning them with wildfire. She got her just desserts for some of her crimes at the end of the show's 5th season, when she was forced to take a walk of atonement through King's Landing completely naked while the townspeople verbally and physically abused her. The walk was shot in Dubrovnik, Croatia, near an ancient church. The production was nearly banned, however, due to the nudity. In the end, actress Lena Headey asked for a body double. Thanks to the magic of visual effects, Rebecca Van Cleve's body stood in for Cersei's. Van Cleve spent 3 days walking the streets of Dubrovnik completely naked while crew members and extras shouted and pelted her with food. Van Cleve's face was never shown. After a number of shocking deaths throughout Thrones' run, viewers have accepted the idea that nobody is safe, which made Jon Snow's false start of a death all the more horrifying. During the Season 5 finale, Jon, now the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, is betrayed by his men and repeatedly stabbed over accusations of treason. The show cuts to black, leaving anxious fans without answers regarding Jon's fate until the next season premiere. Actor Kit Harington told various media outlets he would not be returning to the show, which turned out to be a pretty enormous lie. Jon was alive and well by the second episode of the next season. Harington reportedly hated lying. With huge fans like President Barack Obama concerned about Jon Snow's fate, Harington had to play it extremely safe for over a year. He did get himself out of a speeding ticket by revealing one of the show's biggest spoilers to an anxious police officer, so at least there was some silver lining to this sacrifice.
I looked at him and went, I'm alive next season. And he says, on your way, Lord Commander.
Throughout Game of Thrones' run, Arya Stark has transformed from a young, impetuous would-be warrior to a truly dangerous, faceless assassin. After watching her father's public execution and making the journey from Westeros to the House of the Undying in Braavos, she agrees to learn from the mysterious face changer, Jaqen H'ghar. She waits outside the house for days to earn her place inside. As soon as Arya learns how to change faces, she uses her power to kill Merwin Trant. But because it wasn't yet Merwin's turn to die, Arya is punished by Jaqen, who blinds her and forces her to live as a beggar. While blind, Arya's eyes are clouded. Unfortunately for actress Maisie Williams, her contacts were quite thick and hand-painted, actually obscuring her vision. Williams admitted that while she didn't want to complain, her blind scenes left her in a significant amount of pain. She stuck with it, ensuring that each shot during Arya's blind phase was exactly right. Theon Greyjoy, the once cocky heir to the Iron Islands, has been through his fair share of ordeals. Once a young, stubborn ward of the North, Theon was initially loyal to Robb Stark in the wake of Ned's death. Eventually, he betrayed Robb and was captured by the sadistic Ramsay Bolton, who physically and psychologically destroyed Theon until he referred to himself as Reek. Perhaps the hardest scenes for actor Alfie Allen to endure throughout Thrones were his torture scenes with Ramsay. He spent most of a full season strung up, savagely mutilated and beaten. It can't have been easy for Allen to even pretend to be tortured, and he has since spoken out about how hard it was to play. He watched movies that prominently featured torture, including Quentin Tarantino's bloody classic Reservoir Dogs. Spending so much time within this unflinchingly terrible part of Theon's story must have been incredibly difficult for Allen. Some viewers might have forgotten about Lancel Lannister, played by Eugene Simon. When audiences meet a younger Lancel, he is a seemingly innocent squire to King Robert until the monarch's death. After an ill-advised affair with his cousin Cersei, which is somehow not the grossest relationship she has in the show, Lancel is severely wounded in Season 2's Battle of Blackwater Bay and shunted to the sidelines. When Lancel returns, he's joined an oppressive and severe religious sect called the Sparrows. When Lancel spills the beans about his relationship with Cersei, she gets angrier than ever. Rather than attend her own trial, the vengeful Queen Mother unleashes a magical wildfire throughout King's Landing, killing numerous people. Lancel, sent to find the missing Cersei during her trial, discovers her plan. He can't stop the explosion in time, despite his best efforts. Simon spent hours crawling through a dark dungeon, enduring the journey a whopping 27 times until they got the shot right.
Ready for some Game of Thrones Season 7 spoilers? No? Too bad. Bend the knee and keep watching, because Game of Thrones' Season 7 premiere was memorable for many things, like Arya Stark's vengeful assault on the Frey family, Daenerys Targaryen finally reaching Dragonstone, Euron Greyjoy declaring himself for Queen Cersei, and Sansa giving Jon Snow some serious sass. But despite all that, Season 7 already sucks. You know why? Because Joffrey's not in it. I miss you, Joffrey. So much. But that was all a bit overshadowed by the cameo of Ed Sheeran, whose musical moment on the show was unintentionally hilarious.
It's a pretty song. I've never heard it before.
It's a new one.
Sheeran's stint as a Lannister soldier might have earned a roaring social media response, but it was just one in a series of celebrity cameos that have come and gone on the show. Here are some other famous faces who have popped up in the realm over the years. Gary Lightbody. Sheeran was hardly the first musician to appear on Game of Thrones. In Season 3, Snow Patrol frontman Gary Lightbody leads a battalion of House Bolton soldiers in a rendition of The Bear and the Maiden Fair. In the world of Westeros, this is a folk song everybody seems to know, but in the real world, it was necessary to make audiences aware that the song exists, so that a later episode could take that title and run with a very literal interpretation of it. Roy Dotrice. If you're a long-time fan of fantasy on television, you probably remember Roy Dotrice as Ron Perlman's wise father figure on Beauty and the Beast. But if you're a fan of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, you probably know him as a celebrated reader of the audiobooks. He was personally chosen by Martin after the two had worked together on Beauty and the Beast, and was originally announced as Grand Maester Pycelle for the HBO series. Due to health reasons, he was replaced by Julian Glover, but fortunately he was able to appear in Season 2 as the pyromancer Hallyne. While he isn't on screen much, Hallyne plays a key role in Tyrion's master plan for the Battle of Blackwater, so it's a fitting use of an actor who will forever be linked to the books. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. The House of Black and White, where Arya Stark receives her training as a mystical assassin, features an endless hall filled with columns lined with the faces of the dead. Not statues, but the actual faces that have been removed and serve as masks for the faceless men. Naturally, the production design staff who made the faces ended up including people they knew. Most notably, show creators Benioff and Weiss, whose faces occupy adjacent compartments that receive a bit of camera time. Mastodon. The American heavy metal band Mastodon didn't perform music on Game of Thrones, but they did contribute a song called White Walker to the Catch the Throne Volume 2 mixtape HBO released to tie into the show in 2015. So it wasn't surprising when members of the band showed up in the episode Hard Home, in which they are killed and then resurrected by the White Walkers. The band can thank Game of Thrones executive producer D.B. Weiss for those collaborative opportunities because he's apparently a big fan of the group. George W. Bush. In Game of Thrones' first season, Sansa is made to look upon her father's severed head by the cruel new King Joffrey. And while your eyes may be scarred by the image of poor Lord Stark, there are tons of other spiked heads on display alongside him, including one resembling former US President George W. Bush, which rests next to Sansa's scepter. Benioff and Weiss revealed that they used the already existing head prop for the scene because of their need for heads, not for any kind of political statement. But once the word got out, some people found such a violent depiction of a former president to be disrespectful. This led to official apologies from HBO as well as Benioff and Weiss. Sigur Rós. Another memorable musical cameo comes at Joffrey and Marjorie's wedding in Season 4. The Icelandic post-rock band Sigur Rós shows up with a strange set of musical instruments to perform a droning take on the House Lannister song, The Rains of Castamere. It did not please the king.
Very good, very good. Off you go.
Will Champion. In one of the most chilling episodes of the entire series, Coldplay drummer Will Champion joined the cast to bang the drums in the halls of the twins before all hell broke loose. He's shown merrily thumping away as Edmure Tully and his new bride are sent to their wedding bed, blissfully unaware of the Red Wedding massacre that's about to go down.
That is a very strange custom.
Noah Syndergaard. Ed Sheeran wasn't the only familiar face to make his debut in Season 7. New York Mets pitcher Noah Syndergaard also made a buzzy cameo in the new season, as one of House Lannister's foot soldiers who has incredible aim with spear throwing. We don't know if his character survived the ensuing dragon attack, but in light of how the rest of the army fared, he probably didn't last long in the skirmish, and considering the Mets' 2017 season, he's probably used to it.
With so many big, world-shaking things happening in every episode of Game of Thrones, it can be easy to overlook some of the smaller moments. Here's a spoiler-filled look at some things only real fans noticed in the final season of Game of Thrones. Since the beginning of the show, Daenerys has adopted different traditions and styles from the various tribes and groups she's led and joined, and perhaps the most influential group in her young life is the Dothraki, thanks to the fact that she became a queen of the warrior tribe upon her marriage to Khal Drogo. The Dothraki place an enormous importance upon the length and style of their hair, especially for the men. The more braids a man sports, the more victories he's won in battle, and a Dothraki warrior only cuts his hair if he loses a fight. So the longer the mane, the more formidable the warrior.
When Dothraki are defeated in combat, they cut off their braid so the whole world can see their shame. Khal Drogo has never been defeated.
As a result, Daenerys has sported a lengthy mane featuring a fierce tangle of braids from several seasons. But the 5th episode of the 8th season finds her at a disadvantage, having lost 2 of her most trusted advisors, Jorah and Missandei. When Tyrion checks on her at Dragonstone, her braids are mussed, undone, and ragged, letting the audience know that the Dragon Queen is losing her grip and will end up risking everything to get back on top. When Daenerys was married to the warrior lord Khal Drogo in Thrones' first season, she didn't anticipate having to fight all of her own battles, mostly because Drogo, a prideful and formidable fighter, was all too happy to wage war on her behalf. When Daenerys told him she was pregnant with his son, who was prophesied to be a messiah-like figure known as the Stallion who would mount the world, Drogo made a passionate promise to take the Iron Throne on Daenerys' behalf. That sort of violent destruction is exactly what Daenerys and her Dothraki hordes unleashed on King's Landing in the 5th episode of the final season. It seemed out of character until you remember that Daenerys made a similar pact with the Dothraki back in Season 6. Looks like she has more than kept both of those promises. After losing her husband, Daenerys made several attempts to find armies and benefactors to back her in the war to come. And during Thrones' 2nd season, she ran afoul of the warlocks of Qarth, who stole her dragons and lured her into the terrifying and mystical House of the Undying to get them back. Naturally, Daenerys charged into the temple to track down her children and experienced a number of visions along the way, seeing everything from her late husband Drogo and their lost child to a battered and seemingly destroyed Iron Throne. Standing in an empty and ravaged throne room, it seems as if Daenerys is surrounded by snow, but thanks to the aftermath of King's Landing in the wake of her ruthless and murderous siege, it's clear that her vision has come true. And it's not snow, but ashes. Many viewers always believe that the snow was a sign of the Night King, but perhaps, at this point, Daenerys' reign of fire and blood is even more dangerous and destructive than the Night King himself. And before long, audiences will likely see Daenerys standing in the real, ransacked version of the throne room, ready and determined to take whatever is left of the Iron Throne itself.
Being cast on Game of Thrones can be a mixed blessing. On one hand, acting in HBO's hottest series can seriously boost your acting resume. On the other hand, given the show's history, you're probably gonna get killed off sooner or later, as this long list of casualties can attest. Here's a look at some of the major characters who have died on the show, and where the actors who played them are today. Harry Lloyd Viserys Targaryen. He was supposed to be the true king of Westeros, but Viserys Targaryen was the first major character to meet his maker on Game of Thrones, when Khal Drogo crowned him with molten gold during Season 1. Actor Harry Lloyd has kept himself busy since dying on Game of Thrones, continuing to act on television and in movies like The Theory of Everything. Mark Addy Robert Baratheon. After a hunting trip gone wrong in Season 1, King Robert Baratheon, first of his name, died, prompting his best friend Ned Stark to take action against the machinations of Cersei and Joffrey. Since leaving Thrones, star Mark Addy has surfaced on several television series, including Great Expectations and The Syndicate. Sean Bean Ned Stark. After Robert's death, Ned Stark tried to take control, sending a letter to Robert's brother, Stannis, inviting him to come take his rightful place on the throne. Unfortunately for Ned, Cersei was 2 steps ahead of him, and Ned famously lost his head on the executioner's block at the end of Season 1.
Which is a very, he sacrificed himself for his family. So it was a very moving, a very touching moment, and a good way to go, really.
Although Bean has a reputation for being killed off in many of his projects, he hasn't let that stop his acting career. Since Thrones, he's appeared in a variety of projects, including The Martian and Legends, and some of his other recent work includes roles in the 6-part BBC miniseries Broken and the 2017 thriller film Drone. Jason Momoa Khal Drogo. Although Khal Drogo was dead essentially from the moment that old evil witch lady infected his wound with her fake medicine, his actual death was much more tragic, as Daenerys had to suffocate him with a pillow to put him out of his misery at the end of Season 1. Jason Momoa's brief Game of Thrones tenure served him well in Hollywood, leading to win the role of Aquaman in the DC Extended Universe films Batman vs. Superman, Justice League, and 2018's Aquaman Solo Adventure. And Momoa seems like he's enjoying the ride. Gethin Anthony Renly Baratheon. Following King Robert's death, his younger brother Renly attempted to claim the throne. Renly had one of the largest armies in the Seven Kingdoms and was beloved by everyone. Everyone except his brother Stannis, however, who used black magic to murder Renly in Season 2. After Game of Thrones, actor Gethin Anthony appeared in the 2014 film Copenhagen, as well as the popular series Call the Midwife, then demonstrated his range by playing Charles Manson in the NBC period crime drama Aquarius. He also provided the voice of Gil Brody in the video game Mass Effect Andromeda. Una Chaplin Talisa Mygar. Standing in for the book character of Jane Westerling, Talisa Mygar married Robb Stark, the King in the North. Unfortunately, Robb was already engaged to the granddaughter of Lord Walder Frey, who exacted his revenge by murdering Talisa at the Red Wedding in Season 3. After Game of Thrones, Una Chaplin starred in the 2014 miniseries The Crimson Field and an episode of the popular television show Black Mirror, as well as the 2015 movie The Longest Ride. Richard Madden, Robb Stark. The King in the North, Robb Stark, met his end beside his beloved Talisa, taking a knife to the heart from the traitorous Roose Bolton. It was a traumatic way for actor Richard Madden to end his time on the show.
I managed to get on the plane, covered in fake blood. I was kind of upset at the end of the whole job, and I think I looked like I'd murdered someone, then got on a flight.
Following his exit from Game of Thrones in 2014, Madden appeared in the series Medici, Masters of Florence, and as the prince in the 2015 live-action Disney adaptation of Cinderella. Madden can be seen in the 2017 Amazon original series Oasis. Michelle Fairley, Catelyn Stark. Though Catelyn dedicated her life to protecting her children, she died at the Red Wedding believing she had failed them all. Since her terrible death in Season 3, actress Michelle Fairley has stayed busy with projects including the television series Resurrection and the movie In the Heart of the Sea, as well as the Starz miniseries The White Princess. Jack Gleeson, Joffrey Baratheon. Thankfully, the reign of psychopathic boy king Joffrey Baratheon came to an early end. Joffrey married the widowed Marjorie Tyrell, but his reputation as an evil jerk preceded him, so her grandmother protected her by slipping some fast-action poison into his cup at the reception. Jack Gleeson retired from screen acting after Game of Thrones, but he remains involved in the arts. He founded Collapsing Horse Theatre Company in Ireland, which won an award for their puppet show Bears in Space at the 2016 First Irish Theatre Festival in New York City. Considering how much is packed into every episode of Game of Thrones, it might come as a surprise that there are plenty of scenes filmed for the show that never make it to air. Luckily, HBO has included many of these deleted scenes as bonus features for their home releases, and some of these scenes provide important character details, and even hints at future events. Here's a look at the most important deleted scenes from Game of Thrones. Loras and Marjorie, Season 2. In this deleted scene from Season 2, Loras and Marjorie comfort each other following the murder of Renly Baratheon at the hands of Stannis Baratheon and Melisandre's shadow assassin. Loras is clearly more grief-stricken than his sister, which makes sense given Renly was his true love. More importantly, viewers got an early glimpse into Marjorie's always scheming mind, as she carefully steers Loras away from grief and towards a more pragmatic future, supporting her next political move.
He was a good man. He was a kind, sweet man. But he's gone now. He doesn't need you anymore. I need you. Our family needs you.
Doreah and Eerie, Season 2. During the second season of Game of Thrones, Daenerys learned an important lesson in trust when her handmaiden Doreah betrayed her, murdering the Khaleesi's confidant Eerie in the process. Fans didn't actually see any of that happen, but the sequence was actually filmed before being cut later. In an interview after her departure from Game of Thrones, actress Amrita Acharya, who played Eerie, revealed that she was trying so hard to make the strangulation scene realistic that she actually suffered real injuries to her neck while filming. I had massive bruises on my neck the next day. I was proud. Battle scars. Death scenes are fun. Sansa, the Hound, and Tyrion, Season 2. Sandor Clegane has had one of the most dramatic character arcs of anyone on the show, as the Hound has slowly embraced his humanity. That journey began with his relationship with the imprisoned Sansa in Season 2, but it was a rocky beginning, as this deleted scene shows.
Would you sing a song for me, little bird? A song about knights and fair maidens? Go on, sing.
You won't hurt me.
The scene ends with Tyrion intervening on behalf of his future wife, giving this brief deleted sequence yet another layer of foreshadowing. Pycelle and Tywin, Season 3. Although the audience suspects that Pycelle is playing his own long game, the other residents of King's Landing never quite seem to realize the Grand Maester isn't nearly as feeble as he pretends to be. But in this deleted scene, we discover that Tywin has known all along. More shockingly, Pycelle reveals that it was his treachery that allowed the Lannisters to conquer the Seven Kingdoms in the first place.
Since the time I convinced the Mad King to open his gates to you, I have served the interests of the House of Lannister unfailingly.
Given how much goes on in this short scene, it's a bit surprising they left it on the cutting room floor. Bronn and Shae, Season 4. After Tyrion ends his relationship with Shae in Season 4, he sends her away to Pentos where he hopes she will be safe. Later, she shockingly resurfaces to testify against him at his trial. Why? Well, the seeds for that were actually planted in a deleted scene, where Tyrion's buddy Bronn delivers the bad news, along with a speech about how rich people are all total jerks. You can almost see Shae's love twisting to spite as he talks.
These people, even the good ones, they use us as they please. And when we're no longer any use, they spit us out, find someone else they like.
Good job, Bronn. Grey Worm and Missandei, Season 5. In this deleted sequence from Season 5, we get to see an extended version of a scene between Missandei and Grey Worm after the Unsullied named White Rat was killed in a marine brothel. We get to see a hint of the beginning of the romance between Grey Worm and Missandei, as she tells him that she is afraid what might happen to him if the Sons of the Harpy attack.
You will be careful.
Careful.
You will protect yourself.
I protect Daenerys Stoneborn.
Of course, shortly after this, Grey Worm was nearly killed, only surviving thanks to the sacrifice of Ser Barristan. Next time, listen to your girlfriend. Arya and the Mummers, Season 6. In several parts of Season 6, Arya works with the troupe of mummers in Bravos as they perform their satire of Westerosi current events, The Bloody Hand. But not everyone in the audience enjoys the performance as much as Arya, as shown in this deleted scene.
Violence and profanity. How original.
Why don't you just leave then?
If you're familiar with the controversy surrounding the show after the events following Sansa's wedding to Ramsay Snow in Season 5, it's not hard to recognize this deleted scene as a subtle dig at viewers who complain about the show but continue to tune in anyway.
I'm going on a wild boar hunt!
From coffee breaks to disappearing extras and rubber swords, there have been some unexpected sights in Westeros over the years. Here's a few of the biggest on-screen mistakes you can catch and chuckle at throughout Game of Thrones. During the 4th episode of Game of Thrones' 8th and final season, the majority of the show's characters found themselves celebrating their victory against the army of the dead at Winterfell in a raucous party scene filled with drinking games, dirty jokes, and even a marriage proposal. As Jon Snow is venerated by his friends for his valiant efforts during the Battle of Winterfell and Daenerys watches, a coffee cup is clearly visible on the table in front of her, sticking out like a sore thumb among mugs of ale, goblets of wine, and other medieval-style props typical of Thrones' time and style. Naturally, fans didn't let this pass quietly, and they stormed the internet to make a million Starbucks jokes, and even the cast got in on the joke. HBO, for their part, released a jokey statement about the mistake, but went on to digitally remove the cup from the episode. Throughout the series' run, Game of Thrones viewers have watched Daenerys Targaryen pick up titles, amass armies, free the downtrodden, and experience enormous overall character growth as she evolves from a meek, naive child bride to one of the most powerful players in the Seven Kingdoms. As she fights her way to the Iron Throne, Daenerys learns new traditions from the different tribes and people she encounters along the way, and one of them has to do with her hair and its very specific styling. Thanks to Daenerys' first love, Khal Drogo, one of Daenerys' signature traditions is to keep her hair long and continue to add complicated braids to her updos. Braids indicate battle victories for the Dothraki, and long hair means you haven't yet been defeated by your enemies. With that many braid wigs laying around, it's probably hard to keep track, and sharp-eyed viewers caught a rare wig error during the first episode of Thrones' 8th season. As Daenerys rides into Winterfell alongside Jon Snow, her wig visibly changes, displaying a totally different braid style between 2 quick shots. Daenerys' hair is a pretty important symbol, but sometimes even the crew probably has trouble remembering which wig goes on when. That many wigs would make anyone go a little crazy. Throughout 8 seasons, fans have become quite familiar with Game of Thrones sets and various locations. Since the beginning, the show has made use of incredible natural beauty across the world to bring the Seven Kingdoms to life. From quiet shores in Spain to the rolling green hills of Northern Ireland, snowy spots in Iceland, and ancient Croatian cities, Thrones has utilized some of the most gorgeous places on Earth to serve as stand-ins for these fantastical locations. These incredible filming locations give the show a sense of enormous scale and richness that digital effects alone would never create. As the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, King's Landing is one of the grandest locations on the show, positioned as a large city that sits directly on the sea. Even though it gets a digital makeover every time it shows up, that city is actually a real place. Thrones set their King's Landing scenes in the real city of Dubrovnik, Croatia, known as the Jewel of the Adriatic, which now draws hordes of visitors every year thanks to its prominent screen time on the show. For the vast majority of that screen time, the gates of King's Landing looked out on a green, pastoral space. And then in Season 8, it looked a little drier. Yeah, it took on a totally new look with an expanse of flat, empty desert stretching out from the capital. If viewers had never seen the gates before, this might make some sense, but considering that audiences have spent plenty of time looking at King's Landing, this continuity error is especially jarring. The coffee cups spotted during Season 8's The Last of the Starks inspired plenty of jokes, but thanks to long hours and grueling shoot schedules, there's bound to be plenty of coffee cups laying around Thrones' set, and most people don't know that this wasn't even the first errant cup to be spotted on the series. During Season 4, Episode 2, The Lion and the Rose, which focused almost entirely on an ill-fated royal wedding, a behind-the-scenes shot of the Lannister clan catches Jaime Lannister clutching a coffee cup of his own. Fortunately, this blunder wasn't nearly as bad as the internet made it out to be. Since the scene was part of a behind-the-scenes featurette that didn't make it to the episode, it didn't attract as much attention as Daenerys' cup of herbal tea in Season 8. But it still goes to show that there are plenty of caffeine habits waiting to slip up the stars on the set of Game of Thrones. The opening credits of Game of Thrones have been lauded for their well-designed, imaginative take on the series, giving fans plenty of Easter eggs throughout the years, as well as spotlighting each location prominently featured in each season. After years of moving across the Seven Kingdoms with stylized, moving models of each major city or location popping up to show where fans might find their favorite characters this time, the Season 8 title sequence changed considerably, focusing on the North and King's Landing as the massive war between the two factions of Westeros draws to a bloody close. Another little detail during the opening credits is the fact that each actor bears a sigil next to their name in the credits, identifying their House of the Seven Kingdoms, from Starks to Targaryens to Lannisters. But every now and then in the early seasons, someone would end up identified with the completely wrong house. Maybe the showrunners hadn't quite figured out how the credits would work yet, but during the first season, Sophie Turner, who plays Sansa Stark, was suddenly a Targaryen. Emilia Clarke, who plays Daenerys Targaryen herself, ended up marked as a Lannister, and Ian Glenn, who plays Daenerys' faithful right-hand man Jorah Mormont, was also apparently a secret Lannister. This show does have a lot of characters to keep track of, but these particularly obvious gaffes probably could have been avoided. It's worth noting that these mistakes have apparently been remedied since they first showed up. One of the most serious afflictions in Thrones lore is known as grayscale, a super contagious virus-like disease that turns human skin into a stone-like substance and makes the victim both unrecognizable and insane. Spread by touch, grayscale is notorious and deeply feared. Even when the spread of it can be stopped, as it was for Shireen Baratheon, most of Westeros agrees that grayscale is incurable and must be quarantined. Even though the audience learns later that you can apparently just cut it all off and be perfectly fine. But nobody knew that during the show's 5th season, as Jorah Mormont and Tyrion Lannister travel through ancient Valyria to track down Daenerys. While floating into the city on their boat, they encounter a group of violent men all afflicted with serious grayscale.
Stone men, don't let them touch you!
Although Tyrion escapes their clutches, Jorah ends up with a patch of grayscale on his wrist and resigns himself to a slow death during which he'll never touch another person. A short while later, however, when Jorah and Tyrion have met up with Daenerys in the fighting pits of Meereen, Jorah straight up takes Daenerys' hand to save her life. Since he still has grayscale at this point, he could have transmitted the disease and killed her simply by touching her. After taking great care to illustrate that Jorah can't touch anyone at all so as not to infect them, this seems like a pretty massive oversight even in the middle of a tense battle scene. Game of Thrones is no stranger to huge battle set pieces, and Season 6's The Battle of the Bastards, a long-awaited showdown between Jon Snow and Ramsay Bolton, was no exception, pitting the underdog Stark family against the sadistic Bolton clan. Considered one of the best episodes of the entire series, The Battle of the Bastards combined an incredibly choreographed and gorgeously shot battle sequence with real emotional heft and an incredibly satisfying ending. Goodbye, Ramsay. It's no surprise that fans and critics alike venerated the popular episode, which scooped up a whopping 7 Emmy Awards in categories that included writing and directing. Fans were thrilled to see Jon charge into righteous battle with his sword Longclaw, but in one particular shot, something seems to be a little wrong with the blade. As Jon jumps onto his horse to enter the fray, his sword literally bends, making it obvious that Kit Harington was outfitted with a rubber sword for this particular shot. Jon probably won't take down any enemies with this, but it at least gave viewers a good laugh after the episode aired.
This is Valyrian steel.
During the show's 3rd season, Jon Snow infiltrates a group of wildlings only to fall in love with Ygritte, a fierce, fire-haired warrior who spends most of her time telling Jon Snow how much he knows.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Eventually, Ygritte falls hard for Jon in return, and the two of them set out to scale the wall and make their way into Westeros with a few other wildlings. Though Jon eventually returns to the Night's Watch, betraying Ygritte, she still can't bring herself to kill him, and eventually dies in his arms when the wildlings stage an attack on the Night's Watch, leaving Jon feeling pretty dang sad at the loss of his first love. Ygritte and Jon are still pretty hot and heavy by the time they reach the top of the wall along with a few other wildlings, and as they look out at the green landscape of Westeros, they kiss passionately, elated by their achievement. However, their kiss is so powerful it apparently knocks any other wildlings right back off the wall they just climbed, since everybody else vanishes by the end of the shot. Wanting some privacy for such an epic romantic moment is understandable, but that's just taking it too far. On a huge show like Thrones, there's bound to be some prop accidents, especially when a lot of the props involved are enormous metal swords meant to look as menacing as possible. As with all fantasy series, swords carry a lot of weight, with characters gifting, naming, and gushing over specific weapons that travel throughout the show. A perfect example is Ned Stark's sword, Ice, which is melted down after his execution and made into 2 new swords named Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. Needless to say, swords on the show are treated with all kinds of respect, but sometimes extras might have a little trouble managing these massive weapons. As Sir Barristan Selmy is unwillingly discharged from the Kingsguard during the first season, there's a tense moment in which it looks like Sir Barristan might try to start a fight. Fortunately, the moment is diffused without bloodshed, and Barristan storms off into retirement, at which point all the guards sheath their swords in one smooth motion like the pros they are. Well, almost all of them put their swords back. One of the extras has some trouble getting his sword back into his sheath, which, embarrassingly for that extra, ended up making it into the final cut.
Daenerys Targaryen, played by Emilia Clarke, quickly became one of the most popular characters in Game of Thrones. Audiences hopped on board her hellbent mission to bring her rage to Westeros and oust the Lannisters from the seat of power, the Iron Throne, which Daenerys believes is her birthright. The show spends plenty of time developing her character in a way that made audiences feel incredibly sympathetic towards her cause. She's undoubtedly one of the show's most beloved heroes.
I need to be more than that.
Once she fully came into her own, commanding armies and fighting for justice, Daenerys was, indisputably, a brilliant and compelling character, not to mention the addition of her dragons, which only made fans invest in her quest even further. While it was obvious what producers D.B. Weiss and David Benioff were trying to say about the allure that true power holds and how it easily corrupts people, one particular scene took things too far. This is, of course, when Daenerys burned King's Landing. It's a moment moment that, unfortunately, turned fans against Daenerys in the final season of Game of Thrones. Okay, sure, Daenerys burned people alive using her dragons a number of times, but it's the intention behind the destruction of King's Landing that just took things too far. Now, we can admit that Daenerys was in a bad place. Jon Snow, played by Kit Harington, rejected her because he discovers they're related. Yikes. She loses both her closest confidant, Missandei, played by Natalie Emmanuel, and one of her 2 remaining dragons to Cersei's forces. Daenerys has nothing left to lose, which leads to the complete destruction of King's Landing in Season 8, Episode 5, The Bells. It's completely Daenerys' choice to willingly burn probably thousands of innocent people, including women and children, alive in the streets. The civilians' collective terror is truly felt throughout the episode, with a war happening on the ground and a fire-breathing dragon hovering in the sky. At this point, Daenerys is no longer a liberator. It's a complete departure from and betrayal of the woman who was so dedicated to freeing slaves for the past 7 seasons. When faced with King's Landing, Daenerys kills thousands of people simply because she can. As the battle rages, Jon is horrified by her actions when he sees the burnt bodies of men, women, and children litter the ground. It's only further hammered home that Dany is truly off the deep end when she announces in the season finale, The Iron Throne, that she was planning to extend her wrath across the rest of the world. Jon ultimately faces an impossible choice and kills his queen, aunt, and lover right in front of the throne she wants so badly. There's no question that Daenerys, a hot-blooded Targaryen with a family history of mental instability and massive dragons willing to do her bidding, made some troubling decisions throughout Thrones. Still, viewers could always be comforted that she was on the right side of justice. That is, until the show's final season. The creative minds behind Game of Thrones maintain that the Daenerys twist was planned all along, and it makes sense with her character. However, the Daenerys that audiences fell for would never have killed innocents. Though Clarke initially defended the finale back in May of 2019, saying Daenerys' destruction was a logical route for the character to take, she has since reversed course. During a June 2021 chat with MTV News correspondent Josh Horowitz on his podcast, Clarke said, "I get why people were pissed. I totally get it." Though Clarke said she did have some, quote, autonomy over Daenerys' character arc. When all was said and done, she just had to play what was given to her as truthfully as possible. She added, "The editor decides what it looks like, and the writer decides what I'm saying, so you just gotta go in and try and give it as much truth and honesty and yourself as you possibly can." Whether you want to relive Daenerys' best moments or yell through the bells all over again, all of Game of Thrones is available to stream on HBO Max.
If you clicked on this video, then let's just get this out of the way up front. There are major spoilers ahead for the most recent episode of Game of Thrones. Last warning before things turn into a spoiler-filled free-for-all. Entitled The Bells, the latest Game of Thrones episode saw Daenerys Targaryen and her allied forces carry out their siege of King's Landing. It all came off the back of Dany witnessing Cersei Lannister executing her friend Missandei, and Daenerys herself executing Varys after he betrayed her. Clearly, Daenerys wasn't in the calmest or most rational state of mind when she and her troops rocked up to the Westerosi capital. Watching Missandei be decapitated, quickly realizing that people in Westeros love Jon Snow and will support his legitimate claim to the Iron Throne, and the understanding that she only knows fear in the country proved too much for Daenerys. She unleashed fire and fury on King's Landing, commanding her dragon to burn the city down even after its people rang the bells and surrendered. But it wasn't just dragon fire that blazed through King's Landing. Bursts of emerald flames erupted throughout the city too. For those who may not recall, that's wildfire, a highly flammable and incredibly volatile liquid created by the pyromancers of the ancient society known as the Alchemist Guild. Wildfire begins as a bright green liquid and burns with great strength when it's ignited. It doesn't carry quite the same properties as normal fire, as it cannot be extinguished with water, only with sand. Season 8, Episode 5 wasn't the first time viewers caught a glimpse of wildfire, of course. Cersei utilizes a huge cache of wildfire hidden beneath the Sept of Baelor to blow up the place of worship during Season 6, which kills then-Queen Margaery Tyrell. That allows Cersei to claim the Iron Throne after her son, King Tommen Baratheon, takes his own life following the fiery carnage. Wildfire appears in Season 2 as well, when Tyrion Lannister learns that Cersei is planning to use wildfire as a weapon of defense against Stannis Baratheon and his fleet on Blackwater Bay. Tyrion and Bronn pay a visit to the head of the Alchemist Guild in King's Landing just ahead of the Battle of the Blackwater. The alchemist tells Tyrion and Bronn that wildfire might be potent enough to burn off people's appendages, and then highlights an intense connection between wildfire and House Targaryen.
After the dragons died, wildfire was the key to the Targaryen power.
Wildfire was discussed again during Season 3. On the 5th episode of that season, Jaime Lannister reveals the true reason he slaughtered the Mad King Aerys. The tyrant wanted to burn every last inch of King's Landing using wildfire. The Mad King, realizing that his opponents were going to win the battle, had his pyromancers tuck stores of wildfire in various locations throughout King's Landing. Jaime explains to Brienne of Tarth that the Mad King was obsessed with the stuff and he loved watching his enemies burn.
He burned lords he didn't like, he burned hands who disobeyed him, he burned anyone who was against him.
As past seasons have established, wildfire is a chosen weapon of House Targaryen, one that its members favored when its greatest advantage over the Seven Kingdoms, their dragons, all died out. It only makes sense that wildfire would appear again when Daenerys, the last living child of the Mad King, let the devastation of death, the reality of fear, and the overwhelming desire for power turn her into a version of her father. The Mad King attempted to burn King's Landing with wildfire and couldn't, but his daughter finished the job decades later. It's almost guaranteed that the wildfire scene on Season 8, Episode 5 came from the stores that the Mad King's pyromancers placed across King's Landing, ones no one had found until Dany ordered Drogon to blast his flames everywhere. It also draws yet another terrifying parallel between Daenerys and her father, the man she tried so hard not to become up to this point. Will she suffer the same fate he did, killed by a knight with a swift hand? The final episode of Game of Thrones will reveal the answer.
The former head of House Stark has spilled the beans about his final moments on Game of Thrones. Even after 7 more seasons of pain and bloodshed, the death of Eddard Stark still stings. Played by Sean Bean, Ned Stark was originally positioned as the closest thing the expansive fantasy series had to a main character, making it extra devastating and effective when he met his maker at the end of the first season. For those who don't exactly remember what happened to Ned, he falsely confessed to treason after Robert Baratheon died in a hunting accident calculated by Cersei Lannister, and Cersei's son Joffrey took the Iron Throne. Ned questioned Joffrey's claim to the throne, then Cersei had him locked up and demanded he own up to treason. Though Ned's daughter Sansa and Cersei both asked Joffrey to reconsider, the little tyrant ordered Ned to death by beheading anyway.
So long as I am your king, treason shall never go unpunished. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head.
Just before the blade came down, the Stark Patriarch could be seen whispering a few words. With none of his last words being audible and the books providing no insight, viewers have been left to formulate their own guesses as to what the former head of House Stark may have said as he shuffled off this mortal coil. From the obvious possibility of the series' favorite aphorism, which translates to "all men must die." Others have made more plot-specific suggestions, like the idea that Ned was secretly stating that Jon Snow wasn't his bastard son, but the child of his sister Lyanna and Rhaegar Targaryen. In an interview with the Huffington Post, actor Sean Bean finally revealed Ned's last words. They weren't an important message with grand implications for the plot, nor a popular catchphrase. In actuality, Ned said a simple, quiet prayer just before dying. Bean explains that he wanted to make Ned's death seem as realistic as possible in a series that features dragons and men coming back to life and a frosty villain who can reanimate corpses. He said, "I couldn't be too specific because I don't know if religion like that was around in those days, whatever they were. I just thought, what would you do if this were really gonna happen? You probably would pray. You probably would murmur some words and keep it quiet. You'd keep it to yourself." According to Bean, he didn't set out to give fans something to speculate on, saying he only spoke during the scene because it felt right for the character. He added, "It's quite subtle in that many people wouldn't pick it up. It was an interesting thing for me to do at that point. There's not much you can do, really. You've got your head on a block. That's about the only thing you can do is murmur." The interview also confirmed that Bean has indeed seen all of the online talk regarding his many on-screen demises. including a rundown from Nerdist that put the actor's on-screen death count just behind the oft-murdered Kenny from South Park. According to the actor, he's pleased people are amused at the unusual niche he's carved out. He said, "Oh, I'll have to get some jobs, some dying jobs. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. I don't mind being slightly behind a cartoon character." On the sort of bright side, Ned Stark was far from the last person to face an untimely death throughout Game of Thrones' run. Battle after battle after battle saw dozens of major characters bite the dust, with the final season including some of the most shocking, impactful deaths of the entire series. Another much-beloved hero was killed in the exact same manner as Ned, a swift sword chop to the neck ordered by a member of House Lannister. That character had but one final word to say before dying.
Dracarys!
But Ned had a small list to peek out. With the way things are going on Season 8 of Game of Thrones, we just hope Ned's prayer included a wish for everything to turn out fine in Westeros. Hafthor Bjornsson, better known as the Mountain That Rides on HBO's Game of Thrones, isn't just one of the strongest people on TV, he's one of the strongest people in the world. How did this lean and mean Icelander become the most fearsome knight in all of Westeros? It hasn't always been pretty. Bjornsson was always a big person, but before he was the freakishly huge mad dog of the Lannisters, he was more tall than he was wide. Instead of weightlifting, he put his talents to use as a professional basketball player in Iceland's first division. As a younger man, Bjornsson says his weight hovered around the 230-pound range, which is nothing compared to the near 400 pounds he eventually achieved. He said in an interview with GQ, "I was always taller than everybody else. I've been training all my life, but probably didn't grow muscly until I quit doing basketball." His naturally large frame gave him a big advantage on the basketball court, but he also was dedicated to working out and getting better. Speaking to Men's Health, he said, "I was a bit crazy and trained a lot, probably 3 times a day, before school, then afterwards, plus I was lifting at night." His intense work ethic paid off on the court, but his basketball days were plagued by a recurring ankle injury which ultimately dashed his hoop dreams. He told GQ, "I was always getting injured. I injured my ankles quite badly. I had to have surgery, so the second time I had an operation, I decided to take a break from basketball to heal my foot." After basketball, Bjornsson wasn't sure what to do with himself. Already accustomed to a heavy training regimen, Bjornsson decided to stay the course and keep working out. But instead of going hard in the paint, he went to work in the weight room, focusing his energy on simply improving his body. He told GQ, "I just fell in love with the weights, fell in love with training hard, started to put weight on quite fast, started to get strong really fast. I saw results." Over the next few years, weightlifting turned into a healthy addiction for Bjornsson, and the Icelander nearly doubled his body weight. Of course, weightlifting alone can't turn a 240-pound basketball player into the mountain that rides. It may not surprise you to learn that the mountain that rides eats a mountain of food every day. Breaking down his diet to GQ, he said, "I eat a lot of sweet potatoes, a lot of meat, fish, chicken, good fats like cocoa butter, almonds. I love greens like spinach, avocado, broccoli. I eat very healthy overall." Sounds great, but how much is a lot exactly?
So, what were we guys talking about? No.
Bjornsson requires a total intake of some 10,000 calories a day, and there's really only one way for him to fit all that food into his stomach: never stop eating. As Bjornsson told GQ, "If you don't eat, you don't grow. It's just like constantly work for me. I have to eat every 2 hours to maintain my body mass." We're not talking about grazing throughout the day here either. Bjornsson reckons he devours around 6 to 8 full meals a day. Even for a giant like him, such a feat is not easy, especially when he's at work shooting Game of Thrones. Though Bjornsson focuses mostly on heavy weightlifting and strength training, he doesn't always stick to the same workouts. Instead, he believes it's crucial to mix things up. According to Bjornsson, there's more to being an accomplished strongman than simply putting on more muscle. As he told the New York Times, "You can't just be strong, you have to be quick, you have to have flexibility." For that reason, you can sometimes find him out doing cardio exercises such as swimming, biking, or even jogging with his adorable Pomeranian.
He's freakish big and freakish strong, and quicker than you'd expect for a man of that size.
Exercising the entire body is crucial to seeing results, especially when you're already as huge as Bjornsson. He told Men's Health, "When people ask me about my routine, it's hard to say because I change it every week. If you always train the same way, your body gets used to it and you stop seeing results after a few weeks." Bjornsson is big, but he's not interested in getting bigger. Instead, he's aiming to improve the body he already has. He told GQ, "Getting bigger isn't a big deal for me. I don't want to get bigger, but having a nicer body and being stronger is definitely something I'm aiming for. On April 14, 2019, the day of the season premiere of the final season of Game of Thrones, ESPN's E60 documentary series aired an interview they conducted with Bjornsson back in 2017, where the star revealed that he has used steroids.
Have you ever used steroids?
Have I?
Yes.
Yes, I have.
Both Bjornsson and his family expressed fears about his health due to his extreme training regimen. But when pressed as to why he decided to take steroids, Bjornsson replied,
When you want to be the best, you do whatever it takes.
He finally won the World's Strongest Man competition in 2018.
Game of Thrones is one of the bloodiest shows on television, and it takes some serious creative liberties with the source material, especially since it's now surpassed the timeline in George R.R. Martin's books. With a body count that continues to climb with every episode, there have been quite a few characters to bite the dust on the show, even if they're still alive and well in Martin's world. Here are some of those dead Game of Thrones characters you may still read about in the Winds of Winter. Catelyn Stark. On the show, Catelyn Stark's sad tale ended when her throat was slit by the Freys at the Red Wedding. In the books though, she's still kicking around, although we're not sure you could call her alive. Instead of letting Catelyn rest in peace after she was brutally murdered, George R.R. Martin had the Freys throw her body into the Green Fork of the Trident. She drifted downstream until being discovered by the direwolf Nymeria, who was being unconsciously walked into by Arya Stark. Nymeria pulled Catelyn from the river, and she was later found by Beric Dondarrion and the Brotherhood Without Banners. After Thoros of Myr refused to revive her because she was 3 days dead, Beric gave Catelyn the kiss of life himself, bringing her back at the cost of his own life. Undead Catelyn became Lady Stoneheart, the new leader of the Brotherhood who set forth on a bloody campaign of vengeance against anyone even remotely associated with the Freys, the Boltons, or the Lannisters. Although Game of Thrones hasn't been shy about reviving people from the dead, even ones that were already starting to rot like the mountain, Lady Stoneheart has never gotten to come out to play and slay on the show. Ramsay Bolton. Game of Thrones fans may have breathed a sigh of relief when the King of Cruel finally bit the dust in Season 6. Ramsay Bolton's death finally gave Sansa Stark some satisfactory revenge and served up some payback for all the times he'd sicked his dogs on other people. In the books though, Ramsay is still alive and wreaking havoc on Westeros, right alongside his dad Roose. Ramsay last appeared in A Dance with Dragons after wedding Sansa's friend Jane Poole, a steward's daughter that Littlefinger trained to impersonate Arya. Several weeks after the nuptials, a still-alive Mance Rayder disguised himself as a bard to help Theon and Jane flee Winterfell before they ran into Stannis Baratheon's army. Later, Jon Snow, who didn't know Ramsay's bride wasn't the real Arya, received a letter from Ramsay, demanding the return of his wife and Reek. Ramsay claimed to have defeated Stannis' army and slain Stannis himself. Since we know how much Ramsay loves to lie,
I grew up on Saltcliffe, my lord. I was only a boy when they took you away.
It would be smart to take the Bastard of Bolton's words with a grain of salt until we learn the truth in Book 6, which means we should probably consider Stannis as still among the books living for now as well. Shireen Baratheon. There's no doubt that Stannis Baratheon is a cold man in the books and on the show, as his thirst for power comes at the expense of his affection for his wife and daughter. But the show version of Stannis was so much worse than it had to be. In Season 5, the Red Witch Melisandre convinced Stannis and his wife Selyse to allow her to sacrifice Shireen to the Lord of Light, so he might bless Stannis' army and lead them to victory against the Boltons. Instead, half of Stannis' army deserted him, Selyse hung herself, and Ramsay Bolton easily wiped out the remaining soldiers in battle. All while poor Shireen became a pile of dust on her pyre. For readers, the sacrifice scene was probably a shock, since Stannis didn't take Shireen with him to confront Ramsay in Martin's version. In fact, Shireen, Selyse, and Melisandre were all left behind at Castle Black when his army marched with instructions that the princess should be left in charge if he fell. As far as we know, Shireen's still kicking it in her castle, even if her great-scale scars frighten the wildlings. According to the Game of Thrones showrunners though, Shireen's fiery death was one of the 3 secrets that Martin revealed to them about the future of his books. So even if living through Shireen's demise once was enough, it might happen again on paper soon enough. Alliser Thorne. At the end of Season 5, Alliser Thorne managed to organize a successful mutiny against Jon Snow and murdered him to claim the title of Lord Commander. His reign was short, however, after Melisandre resurrected Jon and the wildlings captured the mutineers. Jon executed Alliser for his betrayal. In the books, Alliser still intensely dislikes Jon, but he's wisely avoiding giving Jon any excuse to execute him.
I never once disobeyed an order. Loyalty is the foundation on which the Night's Watch is built.
In fact, Thorne was still away from the wall when the mutineers killed Jon, so he had no part in their treachery. If Jon does get resurrected in the books, then he'll no doubt execute the mutineers, but Alistair Thorne won't be on the gallows with them.
If I had to do it all over, knowing where I'd end up, I pray I'd make the right choice again.
Tommen Baratheon. At the end of Season 6, King Tommen gave new meaning to the name of his homestead, King's Landing. After his wife Marjorie and the entire crowd at the Sept of Baelor were blown up by his mother Cersei, he leapt from his window at the Red Keep and fell to his death. While there was a tragic end for the young king on the show, he's still alive and seated firmly on the Iron Throne in the books, for now at least. The book version of Tommen is several years younger than he is on the television series, and his primary hobbies are signing anything the small council puts before him and playing with the kittens Marjorie gave him. Speaking of his lady wife, she's also still alive in the story, and while the two are married in the books, they most definitely have not consummated their marriage bed. As of A Dance with Dragons, Tommen's future rule was looking bright with his uncle Kevan as hand and regent, but Varys nipped that in the bud when he murdered Kevan and Pycelle. Considering that the prophecy about Cersei's children dying in shrouds of gold still looms large for all the Lannisters, Tommen's death is probably imminent on paper as well. Myrcella Baratheon. Unlike most of the Lannisters, Myrcella was actually a sweet and courteous princess who was flourishing in Dorne, and was quite obviously in love with Prince Trystane Martell. In Season 6 though, Myrcella became one of the victims of Ellaria Sand and her daughters. In her thirst for revenge over Oberyn Martell's death, Ellaria gave Myrcella a poisoned kiss, that later took her life in her uncle/father Jaime's arms. In the books however, Myrcella is alive in Dorne, albeit gravely injured. Cersei sent one of the Kingsguard to bring her back to King's Landing, but Prince Doran's daughter, Arianne, abducted her in an attempt to have her crowned in opposition of Tommen. In a confrontation with Doran's guardsmen, one of Arianne's accomplices tries to murder Myrcella to force a war with the Lannisters, but instead of killing her, his sword maimed her by cutting off her ear and leaving a nasty scar on her face. As of A Dance with Dragons, Myrcella was traveling back to King's Landing, accompanied by Nymeria Sand, who will be taking a seat on the small council. Rickon Stark. On the show, Rickon Stark joined his oldest brother Robb in death when he was killed by Ramsay Bolton to kick off the Battle of the Bastards. He'd taken refuge with the Umbers, but that house betrayed him by pledging fealty and turning him over to the Boltons. Poor Rickon. In the books, some of Rickon's story remains the same. Osha took him and Shaggy Dog, and they split from Bran's group in order to keep the Stark siblings safe. Last we heard of him in A Dance with Dragons, he'd fled across the Bay of Seals, where Sir Davos Seaworth was set to go retrieve him. Hodor. Hold the door! Even though Hodor was giving a devastating backstory and final moment in Season 6, the gentle giant is still alive and well in the books. In A Dance with Dragons, Bran, Meera, Jojen, Hodor, and Summer reached the cave of the Three-Eyed Raven. Although they were attacked by whites just as they arrived, everyone survived the encounter, and Bran hasn't encountered the Night King in any of his green dreams yet. That doesn't mean Hodor will make it through A Song of Ice and Fire unscathed, though. According to George R.R. Martin, while the meaning of his name will be the same in the books, the way its origin is revealed will be different. Knowing Martin, that probably means it will just be as heartbreaking though. Lancel Lannister. Cousin Lancel's future on the show went up in smoke when he was killed in the Season 6 finale. After being dispatched by the High Sparrow to find Cersei, Lancel spotted one of Qyburn's child spies and followed him into the labyrinth of passages below the Sept of Baelor. There, the child shanked him and left him to watch as a puddle of wildfire ignited to burn him and the whole Sept of Baelor. In the books, Lancel was gravely injured in the Battle of the Blackwater, leaving him a frail and pious man after his recovery. He joined the Faith Militant as a member of the Warrior's Sons, an order of knights sworn to serve the High Septon, and when he last appeared in the books, it was to serve as an escort for Cersei during a Walk of Atonement in A Dance with Dragons, so whether he'll still be punished by way of wildfire remains to be seen, which also leaves the fates of the High Sparrow, Marjorie, and Sir Loras in question for now as well. Walder Frey. While fans of the show had to wait several years for it, Lord Walder Frey finally got his comeuppance for the events of the Red Wedding when he was killed by Arya Stark in the Season 6 finale. She murdered his sons Lothar and Black Walder before baking them into a pie and serving it to their father while disguised as a serving wench. After she revealed herself and killed him, Arya took his face and posed as Lord Walder in order to organize a feast for the remaining Frey kinsmen, where she murdered them all with pitchers of poisoned wine. Like the fine vintage that ended the phrase, the scenes were delicious.
Winter came,
for House Frey.
As satisfying as all that was though, Lord Walder is still hale and hearty in the books. As of A Dance with Dragons, the prickly and treacherous octogenarian was recently wed to another young new wife. Somehow we have to believe winter is coming for him in the books too. Olenna Tyrell. The Queen of Thorns, Olenna Tyrell, received a relatively gentle death by Game of Thrones standards in Season 7, when she took the painless poison offered to her by Jaime Lannister after his army sacked Highgarden. Displaying a trademark sharp tongue, the Tyrell matriarch opted to take the poison before revealing to Jaime that she was the one responsible for the murder of his son, Joffrey.
Tell Cersei, I wanted to know it was me.
Like her on-screen counterpart, the book version of Olenna has taken leave of King's Landing, returning to Highgarden the day after Marjorie's wedding to Tommen. She hasn't been seen in the book since A Feast for Crows, so it's unknown if Olenna later returned to the capital after her granddaughter was arrested by the High Sparrow. For her sake, we hope not. Benjen Stark. Uncle Benjen didn't have a whole lot to do on Game of Thrones, despite lasting for 7 seasons. He was mostly just portrayed as that benevolent uncle who rode in to rescue his nephews from certain doom beyond the wall. And after he was toppled by the Night King's army in Season 7, he's probably not coming back for another rescue mission anytime soon. In the books, we never actually get a real confirmation that Benjen was the mysterious undead Cold Hands, but all the clues point to that being the case. He popped up to save Sam and Gilly from the Whites as they fled south from Craster's Keep, and he also killed the Night Watch's mutineers that attacked Lord Commander Mormont. So while he still can't get past the wall because of magical spells, he's probably still lurking out there in the woods for the next time the Three-Eyed Raven needs his help. Littlefinger. In the Season 7 finale of Game of Thrones, Littlefinger's scheming finally caught up to him when Sansa decided she'd had enough of his meddling. With the help of an info bomb from Bran and the slicing skills of Arya, Sansa managed to catch Littlefinger in his own web of lies, and had him executed for treason and murder. In the books, however, Littlefinger is still trying to pull a fast one on people for personal reasons over in the Eyrie. Following his murder of Lysa Arryn, Littlefinger's latest plot is to marry Sandor off with Robin's cousin so that she can ascend the throne when Robin eventually succumbs to his chronic illnesses. A sample chapter from The Winds of Winter indicates that Sansa will have mixed feelings about this arrangement, simultaneously working to protect Robin while seducing his cousin. And since the Woods Witch prophesies that Sansa would slay a savage giant, which sounds like the sigil of House Baelish, he might not make it much longer there either.
Should I send word that I'll be delayed?
Viserion. One of the most shocking moments of Season 7 came when Jon Snow's brigade of zombie captors had to be rescued from a sea of White Walkers by Daenerys and her dragons. In the midst of the rescue, the Night King took aim at Viserion and managed to slay the dragon before resurrecting him as a new undead mount that he could take through the wall. In the books, Viserion and his siblings are safe, for now. One of the Martells tried to capture one of the dragons, but failed miserably. And when we last saw Viserion in A Dance with Dragons, he was happily roasting and eating the plague-filled corpses that the Yunkish army were flinging into Meereen. Yum. The rest of the undead. As if those names weren't enough to prove that Game of Thrones showrunners have an even heavier hand than George R.R. Martin, some of the other characters the author has yet to kill off include Barristan Selmy, Doran Martell, Bryndin the Blackfish Tully, Randall and Dick Ontali, Lady Walder Bolton, the Sand Snakes, Thoros of Muir, and One, just to name a few. In other words, if you thought George R.R. Martin was savage, he's clearly got nothing on the TV show's writers.